And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gnostic Media's podcast, UnSpun, episode number 93. Jacob Duellman is back. We've got a lot more to cover, a lot of interesting material that we've been going into for, I guess a couple of months now, right, Jacob?
Yeah, a few months. I haven't just been studying Scaliger. I've kind of found some new branches of research that we'll be going into after this that I've also been kind of accumulating knowledge about. But yeah, the last few months it's been Scaliger and history. So it's been very interesting, a very educational experience for me, and hopefully for the audience too.
So, at this point, we might as well ask the question: Are you fairly convinced at this point that events like the so-called Dark Ages are faked, or where are you sitting on that now with all your research?
Well, the thing is, this is research in motion. So it's not so much about cementing myself into a belief whether or not something is or isn't, but I will say that I'm hedging more on the fact that a lot of books appear to be forgeries. They don't appear to be genuine, and a lot of the sources that you try to trace back as far as material, you can't find the manuscripts. You can only find the first book that may have been printed in the 14 or 1500s, late 1400s, early 1500s. So when you look at that, it builds an air of skepticism. And then when you look into Scaliger's work and his father, they revived a lot of the classics, which we'll be getting into. And it seems to me that a lot of the Latin translations that come out are from them. I mean, not just them, but them and their contemporaries. So we should probably dive into it because I have about 22 and a half pages of material here we have to get through.
All right. Let's get to it. And just really quickly, thanks everybody who donated over the last week, supported the show, and I think you may have had some donations in the past too, didn't you, Jacob?
Yes, I do. I'd like to thank them. I don't have their names in front of me right at the moment. I should have put that up there, but there were a few people that have been quite generous, and they may want to be anonymous anyway. So I just want to say a very, very big thank you to those who have donated me in the past, and those that are considering it tonight or in the future. You can donate at Jacob Duellman, JACOB DUELLMAN on PayPal.
Yep,
Or just
and
I'll hook you up with a link or something.
Yep, and and I can put it up on the Gnostic Media website. And of course, there's a donate button at the top of the Gnostic Media website, or you can donate from PayPal directly to contact@gnosticmedia.com. And please also hit the donate button in the chat group on the YouTube thing. All right, enough nonsense, enough begging for money so we can pay the bills and keep the lights on and do our research. But anyway, let's get to it.
All right, so this is Scaliger Notatus Hallucinatio Scaligeri, Part 4. I'm going to start us off with a quote. This is from Mark Pattison. From the space which Joseph Scaliger once filled in the world, at least in the world of books, it might have been thought that he would have found many biographers. In the 17th and 18th centuries, every writer of any figure had his Boswell. Boswell did the biography of Samuel Johnson. Joseph Scaliger wrote the life of his father, Julius Caesar, but Joseph himself is an exception. Professor Bernays, at the distance of 250 years, is the first person who has undertaken to give any complete account of perhaps the most extraordinary man who has ever devoted his life to letters. This remarkable silence is itself not without a cause. Scaliger's great work in historical criticism had outstripped any power of appreciation which the succeeding age possessed. It was not that his name was forgotten at his death. On the contrary, his fame maintained itself, at least during all the first period of splendor of the Leiden school, by whom reverence for Scaliger was exalted into a cult. that, that was written in the Quarterly Review, Volume 108 in 1855. And that was during his review of Jacob Bernays' book. Now, tonight's episode...
And just to remind folks who Jacob Bernays is, of course, that's Edward Bernays' grandfather, Edward Bernays, of course, was the father of propaganda, wrote the book Propaganda in the 1930s, and we've done so much to expose him. So, his grandfather was involved in similar bullshit,
Which we covered a little bit in Part 3 as well, including his uncle Sigmund Freud. Now, yes,
the double nephew thing going on there.
Now tonight I'm going to be sourcing through 6 encyclopedic dictionaries. Over my shoulder, you'll see 5 of them. One of them is still on its way from Ireland, and I was able to use a PDF copy from an online library, the Hathy Trust. So thank you to Hathy Trust for putting that online for me to study. But I will have a physical copy to verify within days. I was hoping to get it by today. Unfortunately, I didn't. So the first one is a general dictionary, historical and critical, from 1734 to 1741. Second, a new and general biographical dictionary from 1761, and the second edition from 1784. The Encyclopedia Britannica, third edition from 1797. Chambers's Encyclopedia, a dictionary of universal knowledge for the people, 1872. The Encyclopedia Britannica, ninth edition. That's the R.S. Peale reprint with American revisions and additions. Now, this edition also has pretty much a facsimile copy to the what is in the 11th edition, although there are a few minor changes, which I'll discuss later on. And then finally, the Everyman Encyclopedia from 1913 to 1914.
All right. And just so you know, as you're going, I'm showing some of the notes on screen just so people can see what they are, you know.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. As we move through each source, the emphasis will hone in on new information and errors. The first known English language biography will be read in its entirety, with exception to the several columns on Joseph Scaliger's works, which I will focus on in more detail in future presentations. So let's get started.
Let's go.
A General Dictionary, Historical and Critical, Volume 9. This is an original article by Thomas Birch, who, after completing this series of encyclopedias, became a Fellow of the Royal Society. Scaliger, Joseph Justus, son of the preceding Julius Caesar Scaliger, was born at Agen in France, August the 4th, 1540, and at 11 years of age was sent with his 2 brothers, Leonard and Janus Constantius, to the College of Bordeaux, where he learned the elements of the Latin tongue and continued for 3 years, being then obliged by the pestilence which raged there to return to his father, who took care of his studies, requiring him every day a short declamation upon a subject of history which he gave him. He employed him also in transcribing poems, which he made himself, and by that means inspired him with a taste and inclination for poetry, which he cultivated so effectively that he wrote before he was 17 years old a tragedy upon the subject of Oedipus, in which he introduced all poetical ornaments of style and sentiment. His father dying in 1558, he went to Paris the year following, being then 19 years old, with a design to apply himself to the Greek tongue. For this purpose, he attended for 2 months to lectures of Turnivus, but finding that in the usual course he should be a long while in gaining his point, he shut himself in his closet, resolving to make use of no master but himself, and having curiously read over the Greek conjugations, began to read Homer with a translation, and understood him perfectly in 21 days. That's under a month. From the reading, he formed himself a grammar, which was the only one that he used afterwards, in 21 days. He proceeded then to the other Greek poets, whom he read over in 4 months, and next the orators and historians. At last, by a constant application for 2 years, he gained a perfect knowledge of the Greek language. He afterwards turned his thoughts to the Hebrew tongue, which he learned by himself with great facility. He made no less progress in the sciences, and his writings procured him the reputation of one of the greatest men of that or any other age. In 1563, he attached himself to Louis Chastanier de la Roche-Posay, who was afterward Bishop of Poitiers, and whom he attended in several journeys. In 1593, he was invited to the University of Leiden to be honorary professor there. In the fourth volume of the Menagiana, pardon my language there, I can't really read that one, it's difficult, Menagiana, we are informed that when he went to take his leave of King Henry IV of France, upon his going to Holland, and had represented to his majesty in a few words the occasion of his journey, everybody expecting something considerable to be said by the king, they were surprised to hear his majesty, after he had said, quote, "Well, Mr. Scaliger, the Dutch want to have you with them, and allow you a good stipend. I am glad of it." Unquote. Of a sudden turn in the discourse, and ask him, quote, "Is it true that you traveled from Paris to Dijon without going to stool?" For those of you in the audience wondering what stool is, that means to go number 2. Now, he died at Leiden of a dropsy, January the 21st, 1609, aged 68 years, and was interred in that city, where a monument is erected to him. He was never married. He was a man of great temperance, and so close a student that he often spent whole days in his study without eating. Though his circumstances throughout his whole life were very narrow, yet he always refused the presents which were offered him. And Daniel Heinsius, in his funeral oration upon him, tells us that he refused a large sum of money, which Janin, the French ambassador in Holland, was very importunate with him to accept. We are likewise informed in the Naudania that Monsieur de Nevers, passing through Holland to Hungary and visiting him, offered him a considerable present, which he excused himself from receiving. His writings show him to have been a man of a very haughty disposition and apt to treat others with contempt. Now, those of you who are wondering what he died of, a dropsy is also an edema. This is an abnormal accumulation of fluid in the interstitium located beneath the skin and in the cavities of the body, which can cause severe pain. Clinically, edema manifests as swelling. So he'd just be a really pudgy water, wide kind of poor soul in the last day of his life. Must have been pretty painful. So now we move on to
extremely inflamed.
Exactly, and he died in Heinsius's arms, who is the librarian of the University of Leiden. He became the head librarian, which we'll cover him a little bit more in some of the future episodes. Let me just take a drink here real quick. Now, as I kind of progress through these dictionaries, I'm going to start omitting some certain aspects that are redundant and that have been kind of taken from Thomas Paine's original English biography, and then are later used in the other biographies as they go down the line. But sometimes it may repeat something, which you'll kind of understand why.
No worries. Let's just dig in.
So, a new and general biographical dictionary from 1761 and 1784. This is let's see. I think this is about. Yeah, this is Joseph still. Okay, so his life was a life of severe application to letters, so that there is very little for a biographer to say of it. And so at this time, what the biographers are saying was that Joseph was pretty much a recluse who spent all of his time shut in studying and wasn't very much of a social person, so there wasn't really much that you should write about him. Keep that in mind as we go through his biographies, because things are going to start to develop and change as far as his personality and the way that he interacts with people socially. So he went to Leiden, where he spent the remainder of his life and died there of a dropsy, January 21st, 1609, without ever having been married. He was a man of perfect sobriety of manners, keep that in mind, and whose whole time was spent in study. He had as great parts as his father, an infinitely greater learning, having been trained to it from his infancy, which his father had not. But then he had the same vainglorious and malevolent spirit which disposed him to contemn, and upon every occasion to abuse all mankind. And though Ovid has said that the culture of polite literature and the liberal arts has a tendency to civilize and soften human nature, quote, ingenuus didicisse fideliter artes, emulet mores, nexinet esse feros, which very roughly through Google Translate comes out to liberal arts. It softens manners, does not permit himself to be savage. So,
and of course, that's the trivium and quadrivium, but anyway.
And though Ovid has said, yada, 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 yet we were to judge by the effects it had on these two heroes in letters, for such they certainly were, we should conclude it more likely to make us greater savages in our civilized than we should have been in our natural state. It is proper to observe that Scaliger, the father, lived and died in the Church of Rome, but the son embraced the principles of Luther, and relates that his father also had intentions of doing so. The works of Joseph Scaliger are very numerous and various, but his Opus de Emendatione Temporum, printed in Paris 1583 in folio, is his greatest performance. It contains a vast extent of learning, and three things are observed in it peculiar to Scaliger. The first is that having great skill in the Oriental, as well as in the Greek and Latin tongues, and a prodigious knowledge in all kinds of writers, he collected everything which might serve to establish sure principles of chronology and to fix the time of diverse remarkable events. The second, that he was the first who undertook to form a complete system of chronology, or to lay down certain principles on which history might be digested into exact order and difficult. And I just want to clarify here, some people kind of pass around the myth that he named the Julian period after his father, Julius Caesar Scaliger, but there's evidence inside of his own work that this was actually named after Julius Caesar, the emperor. So, just
or is you know, for all things chronology considered, is Julius Caesar Scaliger actually Julius Caesar Emperor? You know, that may be the gag. You know,
I've been pondering that. That's funny, the thing to think about, because, well, if you look at the way that they use their names, a lot of times these Latin revivalists, so to speak, with perfect knowledge of Latin, especially Julius supposedly, they like to take on Latin names. Dionysius Petavius is, Dennis Patau,
right?
Like Dionysius.
Well, and they were, and we've seen them doing this repeatedly in the 14 through 1600s, giving them ancient Greek-sounding names or ancient Rome-sounding names, and then they're all talking with each other under these names. But this stuff is all written in the Middle Ages. It's not ancient,
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. The more you kind of look at the sources and you look at the people who are bringing this work out to the public, it's like you could say that they're kind of, it's like an ode or like an honoring these ancients by bringing them back because they've been lost for so long. But I mean, really, you got to find these source manuscripts that they're making these documents from, and a lot of times, they mysteriously, get sunken in a ship, or they're burned in a private library, or they were given away in a will and then they've never been found again. And there's a lot of interesting little stories about these books and these sources that just happen to just poof.
Well, and each time, of course, it fails the onus of proof. But ironically, is you have the exact inverse of that with the discovery of these manuscripts everywhere. Poof, they appear. Poof, it's underneath the, a pew in a church, or somewhere, in an ox cart or in a firewood box sitting there in the back of a monastery for 600 years and nobody noticed it, and poof, it shows up. So,
well, there was a mint condition Action Comics #1, I think, that showed up in somebody's wall out in Minnesota 10 years ago. That's a little different, but it's not within the last 100 years, but still.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking, hundreds of year old ancient manuscripts, but my point is that almost every single one of these old manuscripts has the same story. And then we're told that, the Vatican went around under the Inquisition and destroyed all of these books, and then they were re-imported back into Europe, by the Muslims in the Renaissance and all of this stuff. But if we just look at this as that whole period is manufactured, you don't have so many weird things. And then you have this guy Scaliger, who it appears is writing the history that they burned and then tossing it back at at intervals of 333, 1052, and 1800 years per Professor Fomenko.
It's really fascinating, and I this is some of the funnest parts about the research of when I look into Scaliger is I have the kind of mind that likes to just kind of dive in and see how far I can take a citation. I mean, there's some people will just take the history book and just read it and take it at face value, but the more you actually go in and you look at the sources that these people use and you verify them, the more that the story actually builds a picture in your own mind that's a lot larger and a lot clearer than what an author would give you. So, one of the reasons that, you're going to wonder why I'm reading so many quotes in tonight's episode is because these are the things that we need to know and they need to be shared. I'm the kind of person that I don't just want to hear somebody paraphrase what they learned. I'd like to be able to go and see the actual source of what they learned and share it with them and share that knowledge and then walk together.
And it's just like what I did in spies in academic clothing. People need to understand the process of how this works and how these intelligence cells, etc., keep information, keep control of the dialogue, and the public will think that the information is based on a single truth rather than a single group controlling the dialogue. Which on screen I'm showing Carol Quigley's quote, and of course he was President Bill Clinton's professor, discussing how they control the dialogue. So we can see that this is a serious problem that that stretches all throughout all academia and just about everywhere. Under how else would you do it?
Yeah, you'll kind of see the chain of command of who. I wouldn't say controls, but basically directs the ship of classical scholarship and history based off of how we are going to see Scaliger's biography develop. Now, right now we're in the 1700s, but things really start to get interesting when we get into the 1800s. The further away we kind of get, the more and more we're going to see details kind of arise. And I don't want to give too much away because it's going to be much more fun to just discover it on the journey, but pay attention because we're going to start to see a web start to kind of circle around, or the horses are going to start circling around here. So I'm going to get back to the biography here. Now, this is from a New and General Biographical Dictionary from 1761 and 1784 off the top of my head. Scaliger, now we just finished talking about the Julian period. So that was the third aspect of chronology that they were discussing. So Scaliger, who had always the highest opinion of his own productions, imagined that he had in this work carried chronology to entire perfection, and that his determinations would be irreversible. But the sciences do not attain perfection at once, and the errors, which Petavius and others have discovered in this work, show in this instance that they do not. Nevertheless, he has been styled the father of chronology. And that's in the 1700s he's styled, and that probably goes a lot further back than that with his contemporaries. People wonder why we don't really necessarily hear about it now. Well, he was heard about back then. Find perhaps his Thesaurus Temporum Complectans Eusebi Pamphili Chronicon cum Exegoticus Chronologiae Canonibus. Pardon my butchering of the Latin. I really love to learn that. In which he has corrected and reformed many things in his Opus de Emendationem Temporum, may give him a sufficient claim to the title. He wrote notes and animadversions upon almost all the Greek and Latin authors. I'm going to repeat that, upon almost all the Greek and Latin authors. Those upon Vero, de Lingua Latina, were written by him at 20 years of age. I have a lot. We're going to be talking about that in part 5. Gerard Vossius observes that his conjectures are too bold and mentions how Peter Victorius said that Scaliger was born to corrupt the ancients rather than to correct them. Quote, I know not, says Bale, whether we may not say that Scaliger had too much wit and learning to write a good commentary. For, by having too much wit, he discovered in the authors he commented on more fine sentiment and genius than they really had. And his profound learning was the occasion of his seeing 1,000 connections between the sentiments of a writer and some rare point of antiquity. Upon which foundation, imagining his authors intended to allude to it, he corrected the passage. Unless we choose to believe that his desire to explain an obscure point of learning, unknown to other critics, induced him to suppose that it was to be found in such or such a passage. However that be, his commentaries are full of bold, ingenious, and very learned conjectures. But it is not at all probable that the ancients ever thought of what he makes them say. A person who has genius departs as much from their sense as one who has none. And we ought not to suppose that the verses of Horace and Catullus contain all the erudition which the commenters have thought proper to supply them with. End quote. He wrote some dissertations upon subjects of antiquity and gave specimens of this skill in all branches of literature. He made a Latin translation of 2 centuries of Arabian proverbs, which were published at Leyden in 1623 with the notes of Erpenius. So he does have a knowledge of Arabic as well. So, I mean, his knowledge of the written word is quite fascinating, especially at that time. A lot of people like to say that, it's like impossible for people to learn all these languages and get access to all these documents and stuff like that. But I mean, as we're kind of seeing here, he's quite the learned scholar, and we're gonna understand how he does and acquires these documents the further we go along in this presentation. So he did this Scaliger at the request of Isaac Casaubon, who tells us that he employed less time in translating it than others who understood Arabic would have done in leading it. He was also obliged to write some controversial pieces. His controversy was Scioppius, who had convicted him of vanity and living in his De Vetustate and Splendori Gentis Scaligeri as a heap of foul language upon a very futile subject. Well, we're going to end the biography there. I'm just going to say that this futile subject is the false assertions of Scaliger's nobility, which he supports by claiming the existence of a document by Paulus Aemilius Veronensis. This document does not exist and has no documented history of ever existing, which we covered in Scaliger Part 2 and Part 1. So now we're moving on to 1797 and the third edition Britannica. And we're going to start with a brief note on Julius Caesar's article. While much of this article is a short recap of earlier compositions of Julius's life, I find it worth noting the brief account taken on the fraudulent assertion of his noble lineage. Quote, now this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 3rd edition. Scaliger, Julius Caesar, a learned critic, poet, physician, and philosopher, was born at the castle Ripa in the territories of Verona in 1484, and is said to have been descended from the ancient princes of Verona, though this is not, mentioned in the letters of naturalization he obtained in France in 1528. I sometimes wonder the implications were Julius to publish this lie into legal documents to the king. In the original English biography of Scaliger, of the Scaliger family by Thomas Birch in a general dictionary, he presents the naturalization papers of Julius via Bale, who I just quoted briefly up above, and shows that the documents Julius and Joseph claim Paulus Aemilius Veronensis wrote on their lineage do not exist, and that Joseph cannot present a single proof. The author of the third edition Britannica then goes on to write about his life purported by Julius while under the service of Emperor Maximilian, and does not impart any new information. There's a peculiar nature to the sparse presentation of the articles in the third edition Britannica. In spite of the wealth of sources provided by Thomas Birch in his dictionary from 50 years prior, the editors leave much of it out. What is left is essentially lifted from Thomas Birch. So to save time, we're just going to move on from this article for Joseph Scaliger and get on to the fourth. Now, this fourth source, we're going to move up quite a bit, just under 80 years. And this is Chambers' Encyclopedia, a dictionary of universal knowledge for the people. And my edition is from 1872. And we're going to have some notes on Julius Caesar Scaliger. He's one of the most famous men of letters that have appeared since their revival. He was born in 1484. In afterlife, he created for himself a noble pedigree and made out that he was descended from the princely family of the Scalas of Verona.
In afterlife.
In afterlife, yes. A lot of the information, a lot of his stuff wasn't printed until after he had died, and Joseph was one of the primary editors, I believe, that kind of put his material out there, which makes you kind of think a little bit more there too. And he never checked any of the sources of his father, which we'll talk about more as this develops.
Never checked the sources.
Yeah,
just at face value, no matter what his father claimed or that he purported his father claimed.
Exactly. Just like, oh, my father said that, therefore, it's got to be true. But we're going to really get into that here. So let's see. So he created for himself a noble pedigree and made out that he was descended from the princely family of the Scalas of Verona, and his birthplace was the castle of Riva on the banks of the Lago di Guarda. Now, so here we see Lago di Guarda is Lake Garda in English. Here we see a revision in the birthplace of Julius. No longer is it the castle at Ripa. Now, maybe it's just the P and the V, but there's maybe just a change, in whatever sources they had. But it is now the castle of Riva on the banks of the Lago di Guarda. I was doing some research on this because I kind of started questioning, is there a castle at Ripa? Is there a castle Riva on the banks of La Guarda? And I couldn't really find it. I could find a castle Ripa di Ornica or something out in the mountains. I believe, was it south of Verona, I want to say? I think they were south of Verona. And so there's kind of some discrepancies there about his biography. So I started to, do some searches, and I came across David Irving's book, Memoirs of the Life and Writings of George Buchanan. And this book was published in 1807, 10 years after the third edition Britannica. And he has a lot of really fascinating things to say about Julius Caesar Scaliger. And it's really going to expose some fallacies that get kind of proposed in the future. So Julius Caesar Scaliger, according to the narrative of his son Joseph, was born on Friday, the 23rd of April, 1484, in the castle of Rippa, situated at the head of the Lago di Garda. He was second son of Benedetto della Scala, descendant of the royal house of Verona, which was despoiled of its principality by the Republic of Venice. As Benedetto had commanded the armies of Matthias, king of Hungary, and likewise enjoyed the favor of the Emperor Frederick, the Venetians regarded him as a dangerous remnant of his illustrious family. 2 days after his wife had been delivered of this child, they made an attempt to seize the mother and her 2 sons. But notwithstanding her critical situation, she escaped from the castle and fled to her father, the Count Lodronio. Such is the genealogy which Joseph Scaliger has claimed in his unfortunate epistle to Janus Dauza. and his father...
It's comedic slapstick stuff, you know?
Oh, I love it because he just builds it up with the fable, and now we're just going to start tearing it down. And his father, in most of his works, is continually alluding to the same splendor of ancestry. But the validity of their pretensions is extremely dubious. The Italian scholars, as one of them remarked, and as evidently appears from various documents, were generally disposed to consider their royalty as purely fictitious. Cleopius, who attacked the dead father and the living son in a most atrocious manner, advanced many arguments in proof of their mean extraction. The character of this author renders everything connected with his private veracity sufficiently equivocal. He wrote this piece while under the command of the Order of Jesuits. Cleopius did. But, on the other hand, many circumstances contribute to undermine the credit of the younger Scaliger's hyperbolical and romantic narrations. Nor can the answer which he returned to Cleopius be deemed satisfactory with respect to any of the material points of the debate. It is not true that his father was born in the castle of Rippa. He was born in the city of Verona. Now, Bayle, in his short account of Verona, has published letters of naturalization, which Scaliger obtained from Francis I, and he is there denominated, quote, natif de la ville de Verone in Italie, end quote. In those letters, his name and addition were unquestionably recited from his own memorial or petition. If he was actually knighted by the emperor, it is certainly an extraordinary circumstance they should never have assumed so honorable a distinction, as in he never walked around calling himself a knight and assuming it in public. It is apparently false that his original appellation was either Julius Caesar Scaliger of Burden or Count of Burden. Now, there's a little asterisk on the side here. It says, Giraldus, the contemporary and friend of Scaliger, denominates him Julius Caesar qui prius Bordonis cognomina fuit, Veronensis a prime eruditis, which basically translates out to he was previously named Bordonis. His previous name was Bordonis, and they changed it. In the letters of naturalization, he is termed Julius Caesar de l'Escale de Bordon, Docteur en Médecine. Monsieur de la Manoye conjectures with great probability that instead of Bordon, we ought to read Bordoni, and that the omission of a point over the letter I is in the manuscript occasioned the mistake, which then gave the M. Those letters contain no hint of his being descended of royal ancestors, born in the castle of Rippa, and adorned with the honor of knighthood. If Scaliger's high pretensions had been well founded, he would not have failed to state them in his memorial. And if they had been thus stated, the titles of so honorable a subject must certainly have been recited in the instrument which constituted him a citizen of France. The date of this curious document is 1528. Bayle published it from a copy communicated by Balusius. Going back to the article, to accuse these very learned men of downright falsehood may perhaps appear extremely harsh and indecent. But it is not easy to admit many of their assertions relative to this subject, which seems to have interested them above all others. With all their splendid endowments, they were subject to errors which might serve to reconcile the more obscure part of mankind to their obscurity. The paltry distinction of being regarded as the spawn of a house which had once been royal, presented charms sufficient to decoy them from that manly integrity which is a higher ornament than royalty can bestow. And yet, such is the motley texture of the human mind, those very men were adorned by many virtues and were moreover distinguished by a larger portion of genius and erudition than ever felt the share of another father and his son. They always seem to come back and be like, yeah, they lied about their history, but they're really intelligent. Really? I mean, they might be intelligent. They might have a lot of really good points, but they always seem to just say, yeah, he was really mean, but he was also very virtuous and well-mannered. Yeah, he got all these points wrong, but he was still really smart. Well, it's like, well, let's put these two things together here and try to figure out.
Well, he's either a fraud or an idiot, right? You know, you don't make tons of errors and lie about all this stuff if you're a great, wonderful person. I mean, you know, how many times do we come across the use of a pseudonym, a nom de plume, as a sign of somebody being a fraud or an agent? I mean, it's like 99.99% of the time, if somebody's using a pseudonym, you know right off they're dirty.
I always kind of wonder about that. Like, I mean,
it's one of the, in my research and you know, doing all of this stuff for the last who knows how long at this point, but you know, that's always one of the key things that's alerted me. I would say since 2004-ish, it's been a big red flag for me.
Yeah, I always tend to question why people don't want to stand up and use their Christian name or their first name, the God-given, the name that their mom and dad gave them. You have to hide behind some sort of a facade. Is this not a place where we're going to stand up and try to find truth? Like, what are we hiding from? You know, especially if you're trying to purport truth, you shouldn't hide behind a false name. That's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, you're already, people are going to question who you are, and everything's just going to turn into a background check on the guy. You're inviting attention that you shouldn't have.
Even 400 years hindsight, right?
It's hindsight. I mean, it's bizarre.
But you have this entire buildup of modern academia that's essentially based on a clown fraud, you know. And, so all the chronology, the history, for those who don't know, Joseph Scaliger is who created the official historical chronology that everybody uses today. Egypt was here and then, and Greece here and then, etc. This whole chronological timeline, not that that's redundant, but that whole thing is based off of this one guy, as well as Dennis Batavius, or Dionysus as he renamed himself, and, another red flag.
Yeah, I mean, Joseph Scaliger is the man who got the ball rolling. I mean, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. And a lot of the people who go on the History Channel and purport to talk about the ancient pyramids being, 2,000 or some odd years old, even longer, like
the whole chronology is based off of this guy.
So it's like you got to start questioning things, and he's worthy of scholarship. He's worthy to go and check his sources, and not just that, but the people who are influencing him down the line to try to figure out, what are they getting correct and what are they getting wrong? Because it's up to us to kind of figure this out. And I'm sure there are people out there in academia who question these things too. It'd be really interesting to meet them and see what they have. But I mean, people just like Jan and me, just people who have jobs and live normal lives. We can contribute and help out too. But before we digress too far into this, we're only on page 8 of 22.
And it's amazing how a couple of guys can show entire fields of academia as incompetent.
Well, I do have some training. I was an English major in college, so a lot of what I did was diving into books and researching them and quoting them, and trying to figure out where the text is going and where the analysis is leading. So I mean, there's a little bit of a head start I may have, but it's not anything anyone who's graduated high school and actually paid attention couldn't do either. So let's just get back to this now. So Irving then proceeds through Julius's life, much of which was covered in parts 1 and 2, using Thomas Birch's article. The success of using his fraudulent noble history eventually leads Julius to winning the hand of his bride of 16 years after 3 years of courting her. Upon his arrival to Agen with the bishop, quote, and this is going back to David Irving's book, it was the learned warrior's destiny to be there, arrested by the charms of Henriette de Roch-Lobiac, a hopeful damsel of 13. Scaliger was more than triple that age, but he was a scholar and a soldier, and possessed the still superior recommendations of a tall and noble person. It is not, however, astonishing that the relations of Andiet, who was descended of a good family, should hesitate as to the expediency of her accepting the hand of a wrong-headed adventurer. They contrived to defer the match for the space of 3 years, but having persisted in his scheme with that pertinacity which characterized all his actions, he was at length successful. With his amiable woman, who became the mother of 15 children, his union was fortunate in every respect. She not only inherited landed property, it's a big thing there, but possessed other recommendations of a more valuable nature. She composed the wanderings of his desultory life, diverted the current of his native irritability, released him from the ordinary cares of domestic economy, watched over him during the periodical returns of his gout, with sedulity of a servant and the tenderness of a wife. And this is going to just my conjecture here. Thus, the marriage granted a false noble.
Hold on a second. You're just keep going. I'm going to put this up, and you can keep going.
Sure. Thus, the marriage granted a false noble the land and credibility to a title he never had. So, returning to Julius Caesar Scaliger in Chambers' Encyclopedia 1872, quote, Tirabashi, who is a Jesuit, Tirabashi's account, however, which is the more probable, represents him as having been born at Padua, the son of Benedict Bordoni, who was a geographer and miniature painter of that city. Now notice they say he was born at Padua, and David Irving says Verona. Now we're starting to see that the cities are starting to get kind of mixed up here as well. Were we getting closer to understanding this history, or are we still muddying it up? No, this is 1872 that Chambers says he was born at Padua, and in 1807, David Irving says that he was born in Verona. Okay, so we're talking just alone here, I see. He was born at Padua, the son of Benedict Bordoni, who was a geographer and miniature painter of that city, and who, either from the sign of his shop or the name of his street he lived in, assumed the surname della Scala. Up to his 42nd year, young Giulio Bordoni resided chiefly in Venice or Padua, engaging in the study and practice of medicine and appearing under his true name as an author. That true name would be Giulio Bordoni. In 1525, he withdrew to Agen, either from some advantageous offer or with a view to promote his fortune, and there fixed his abode. Now, a view to promote his fortune and then fixed his abode. And if we go in and we look and see, he uses his false noble pedigree, marries a 13-year-old girl who grows to be 60 when he finally takes her hand, and because he marries her, now it inherits landed property. And landed property is a very, very important thing. It's a very important thing now. A lot of people have perfect land and title to the property that they have. So that she has this, and then Julius then comes an acquisition to it, almost takes his false noble and puts him into another status. So here he is raising his status by any means necessary, even if that means lying.
Especially lying.
So Jacob Bernays' student, Mark Pattison, writes a different account of these events in his review of Bernays' biography of Joseph Scaliger. Now, Mark Pattison was who I quoted at the beginning of this episode, a student of Jacob Bernays.
Now, well, let's see. What page are we on in the notes?
We are on page, let me just scroll up here, page 8.
All right, got it.
Just at the bottom. Okay, so Joseph Justus de l'Escale, this is from Mark Pattison. Joseph Justus de l'Escale was born at Agen, then in the province of Guyenne, 4th or 5th August, 1540. De l'Escale is only the French form of de la Scala, the title of the princely house of Verona, who were dispossessed by the Venetians. Excuse me. From a cadet branch of this family, Jules Caesar, the father of Joseph, believed himself descended. When the Jesuits afterwards got their ear of literary Europe, they spent a vast amount of lying and forgery in disproving this descent. You can't forge a document that doesn't exist. That's just a little aside by me. That Paulus Aemilius document, which doesn't exist. Yeah, they forged that. And at last succeeded in persuading the world of their story. The world was bored enough with Joseph in his capacity of princeps literarum. It could not put up with having to acknowledge him a prince by blood besides. The Jesuit onslaught on Scaliger, for he shall use henceforth the Latinized form of the name, as is an important feature in his life, and will have to be explained presently. At 11 years of age, Joseph was sent to a Latin school at Bordeaux, a school where his elder brother, Silvius, now Silvius wasn't mentioned earlier when Thomas Paine's article, he mentioned 2 other names, had been before him, and where their 2 younger brothers accompanied him. See, those are 2 numbered names that were actually called. So a fondness for bringing celebrated names into contact has made the biographers say that George Buchanan was one of his masters. Now, we were just talking about David Irving earlier in his biography of George Buchanan. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. But Buchanan had quitted Bordeaux, where he had been a master at the gymnase or high school in 1544. And at that time, that Scaliger went to school there, not to the high school, but one for younger boys, kept by Simon Beaupré of Orleans. Buchanan was a prisoner of the Inquisition in Portugal. So, in David Irving's life of Buchanan, he does not speak of the younger Joseph, but the elder Julius. The relationship is not of proximity at Bordeaux, but over a long distance. Buchanan's, now this is going back to David Irving's book on the life of Buchanan. Buchanan's social intercourse was not confined to the college and to the city. It was at this period that he occasionally enjoyed the society of a very extraordinary personage who resided at a considerable distance. At Agen, the elder Scaliger was now exercising the profession of a physician. That city, when he there fixed his residence, could not furnish him with a single individual capable of supporting literary conversation, and he was therefore led to cultivate an intimacy with some of the more enlightened inhabitants of Bordeaux. Buchanan, Tevius, and other accomplished scholars who then belonged to the College of Diane were accustomed to pay him an annual visit during the vacation. They were hospitably entertained in his house, and he declared that he forgot the torture of his gout whenever he had an opportunity of discussing. I believe it's discussing literature. It seems like I got cut off there. Discussing literature and the classics and philosophers. So if we take a moment and observe George Buchanan in Wikipedia, we see this passage. And excuse the Wikipedia, but there are sources inside of there which can be delved into.
People just reject Wikipedia by default, but yeah, you can actually check the citations that are provided there.
Yeah, and sometimes, there are old citations that go back to the source. So, yeah, Wikipedia is hit or miss, but the fun of Wikipedia is clicking the citation and seeing where it leads.
I fail to know when the Encyclopedia Britannica has been any more accurate on stuff, but,
Yeah, we'll kind of see that too. So, Michel de Montaigne was Buchanan's pupil at Bordeaux and acted in his tragedies. So, Michel de Montaigne was Buchanan's pupil at Bordeaux. In the essay of Presumption, he classes Buchanan with Jean d'Aurat, Theodore Beza, Michel de l'Hospital, Pierre de Montadore, and Adrianus Turnebus. Excuse my French to the French listeners out there. I'm willing to learn, though. As one of the foremost Latin poets of his time. Here also Buchanan formed a lasting friendship with Julius Caesar Scaliger. In later life, he won the admiration of Joseph Scaliger, who wrote an epigram on Buchanan, which contains the couplet famous in its day, quote, Imperii furiat Romani Scotia lime, Romani alloqui Scotia lime erit.
Maybe we should just read the English versions.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that there actually is a Latin version of it out there, and I butchered it, but there is a Latin. So Austin Seal and Steve Philp translate this as, just as Scotland was at the apex of the Roman Empire, so Scotland shall be at the apex of Roman eloquence. Not only is Buchanan's Latin scholarship extolled, a congratulatory reference to Scotland retaining Scottish law, quintessentially an improved version of Roman law, as the foundation of its legal system is also implied. And boy, I had some cool stuff to talk about in that in future episodes, but I couldn't fit it in right here. So, the sources of that go to the essays of Montaigne. That's Michel Montaigne, the person who this article is about. So if you'd like to go back to it, it's in book 2. So, indeed, when we examine a passage by Vernon Hall in his Life of Julius Caesar Scaliger, he writes, quote, in spite of the distance to Agen and the poor roads, Buchanan and the other professors made it a habit to visit Scaliger at his home, particularly during the wine festival. hints of Bacchus there. Since Scaliger seldom traveled and since he loved literary conversation, these visits must have been the social highlights of his year. Once he had the great misfortune not to be at home after Buchanan had plowed through the wintry road to Agen. Buchanan wrote a poem on the visit in which he claimed that only the thought, the brilliant conversation he would have had with Scaliger kept his spirits up on the journey. Not finding Scaliger at home, he waited 5 days before he had to leave without seeing him. The disappointment, he wrote, far outweighed the fatigues of the journey. And he goes on to talk about this journey. It is incredibly treacherous. So the fact that somebody is going to be riding on this road, I mean, it's fabled to be a terrible road, like dangerous, deathly. I mean, you don't want to ride on it, but he's willing to make this for a journey to see Julius. But he does go on and talks about Silvius, the elder brother of Joseph, arrived at the College of Gien on June 11, 1544, when he was 14 years old. And it kind of goes on and just kind of lists the sources of where he went to school, but kind of skip over that, just save a little bit of time to see where it's 751. But ends with, thus Silvius was at the school at the same time as a younger boy, Michel de Montaigne, who we just quoted earlier, who entered the college in 1539 at the age of 6 and stayed there until he was 13. So the elder Scaligers and Montaigne were also an acquaintance, as shown in Michel de Montaigne, a biographical study written in 1898 by M.E. Lowndes. Now, written in the Letter Francaesis Ineditis de Joseph Scaliger, the elder Scaliger again had some acquaintance with the elder Montaigne's uncle and father of the Essius. Desmarais cites his verses on death of de Ferran with references to Le Boet and Raymond de Montaigne, who died in the same year. Ferranus postquam Montanus Boetiusque in venere inter sidera densa locum. And from Scaliger's letters, Monatus suavissimis salutationibus me saturavit, and I'm just going to skip over, but basically one of the two presumably was Michael's father in these quotes. One suspects that the want of sympathy between the sons to have amounted to personal dislike. Scaliger calls attention to Montaigne's commercial origin. Son pere etiet vendeur de harangues. Montaigne may have had Scaliger in view when he mocked at the genealogical pretensions of his neighbors. And that's in his essays. So, as you can see, Pattinson's a little bit misguided here when he tries to lead people away from Buchanan, because he says that people are linking the Scaligers together because supposedly Joseph went to school when Buchanan was there, and he dismisses it because Buchanan wasn't there. But we can see that Buchanan was friends with his dad. And there's a lot of evidence of it by his contemporaries, that they're writing their contemporary books at that time. So,
there's clearly, significant effort has been made, even still today, to cover up these guys,
Well, there's some tomfoolery there. And Mark Pattinson writes that essay in 1860. Bernays writes his book in 1855. So like David Irving writes his book in 1807. And these two, Jacob Bernays and Mark Pattinson, are the German and the English-speaking foremost scholars on Scaliger at that time in the middle of the 19th century. So those two are the ones that have collected the most information on him. And yet they're still making this curious passage in their book, which shouldn't really exist if they really delve into it. So anyway, let me just take a drink here. I'm starting to get
it's just the same old tomfoolery we're always seeing, I mean, it's... Here's the thing, is one thing I've noticed about professors is they hate people checking their primary citations more than just about anything,
You think people would be flattered by that because they're really interested in my work and they want to see what it is. I mean, you'd only be upset about that if you put a citation in and you were just kind of excuse my poor language, half-assing it or lying about the citation. Then you kind of get, a little naughty there.
Yeah, well,
you shouldn't make the claim if you can't back it up. So it's one of the things I'm really careful about is I really want to make sure that as I'm studying the history that I'm actually finding real proof that kind of leads me down this trail. It's not just about believing somebody's conjecture on the topic, but it's about actually finding these sources and then seeing the credibility of them and whether or not there's, I should continually move on further. And that's the part about, this education and the trivium method is you need to continually go back to what you thought you knew and then examine it and then move it back into the future. Because as the saying goes, I know now what I knew then, but I didn't know then what I know now. And that's what life is all going to be about. Tomorrow's going to be a new day. I'm going to find new information, and it's going to change my worldview, and it's going to change the way that I see things and understand things. And that's okay. That's the beauty of life.
Yeah. There does get to a point when you've absorbed all of the grammar, all of the general grammar that you possibly can on a subject. I mean, when you're digging into the 1600s, eventually you're going to run into a point where there's just no more to get, and you're going to have collected everything you could on Scaliger and his background and everything, and you've exhausted all possible sources and leads, He
seems to be the kind of man you can spend a lifetime studying, because the amount of work that's put out in his name it's extraordinary. And, I really would love to learn Latin to really dive in and really read his words the way that he writes them, instead of trying to.
I bought materials to start studying Latin 3 years ago, and I still haven't gotten past dog Latin.
I mean, it's a really fascinating study, and I find that the more I dive into this, it's been enriching. Just diving in and seeing what they actually said, instead of relying on the authority of people like professors and stuff like that. I mean, yes, they're valuable people, but they're only holding your hand and showing the door. You have to walk through the door yourself and take yourself on that journey, because they can't put all the information in your head through osmosis. But we're digressing here. We're already at almost 8 o'clock. Shoot. So we're on page 11. We're about halfway.
Yeah.
So, with much of
there we go.
So it looks like we have 2 hours here. Hopefully everybody's willing
to. You at the top of page 11? Where are you?
Looks like I'm at the middle of it right here. So we're going to go back to the ending of Julius Caesar Scaliger. So we just finished on Michel de Montaigne and kind of disproving Pattinson's little brush off about the history of their family lineage. So returning to Julius Caesar and Chambers' Encyclopedia. While much of this article in Chambers' Encyclopedia relays further redundancies on the life of Julius Caesar Scaliger, it ends with a peculiar passage worthy of note. His best-known publications are Commentaries on the Hippocratic Treatise on Dreams and De Causis Linguae Latinae Libre, 18. This book is celebrated as the first considerable work written in the Latin language in modern times, and not without value even yet. That's quite a big thing there. We're talking about the revival of letters and the classics, and here's one of the most considerable first considerable work written in the Latin language in modern times. So how did this dead language all of a sudden become part of Julius Caesar's life, and how did he become the master that's bringing it back out for everybody else?
Wait. Repeat that. So you're saying that our knowledge of Latin today also came from Scaliger?
Well, not necessarily Scaliger, but I'm trying to find his source. Who are the educators that are bringing this back out? And perhaps it goes back to the churches, the Catholic Church, the Church of Rome, because I believe it is. We're going to go down here just a little bit further. We're going to talk about his relationship with the church. So that seems to be kind of my supposition as to where the source may be, but it's never specifically said where he's learned this stuff, because again, his past is completely covered up with a false history.
Now, why do you suppose, have you given any thought to why he's covering this up? Is it just financial because he was born a pauper in an age where you had to be bloodline to be recognized as anything significant? What's his deal? Why is his whole background bullshit?
Well, he's a complex man. So
is he just a fraud? Is he we uncover these exact same scenarios with so many hundreds of agents we've exposed on the show? Is it possible, with Emanuel Swedenborg or Dr. John Dee or these guys, that they're agents working for the crown at the same time? That's why they're faking everything. What's the deal?
Well, that's something I've been considering, and we'll get to it actually.
All right.
that kind of comes down to it, but I just want to get that into our mind, because there are gaps that we're going to start to see here, and that gap with Julius, it constantly brings me back to questioning it. And you were asking, was it just to gain a noble heritage? That was one reason, because it's a valuable tool and a valuable means to do. And if you're a man of opportunity and you're able to tell a tall tale and maintain it, why wouldn't you try to use it to its fullest advantage, especially if you're painting yourself as a nobleman? So it makes perfect sense that as, he'd put on this mask, walk onto the stage of life, and then act out being a nobleman for his entire life. And then not just that, but he also then gives himself an air of credibility when he goes and he starts, discussing the classics, discussing, medicine, physique, and his associations with other people. I mean, he through these assertions that he's made in his life, he's able to, attain a vast web of knowledgeable men from all across the continent of Europe. So this is it's quite interesting. It's quite fascinating.
He's just a smooth talker, able to talk himself through, even though, just like his life, the historical analysis and everything that he provides is just as much a fraud.
Indeed. It's quite fascinating. I think I can't remember the source of this, and I didn't put it in here, so maybe I should I'll just save it for another date, because I don't want to get caught in something if I can't prove it. So Joseph Scaliger, let's just go back to
we don't want Brian and Paul getting upset. Move on.
So Joseph Scaliger in Chambers' Encyclopedia. Let us now look at the life of Joseph Scaliger in Chambers' Encyclopedia. That's this book right here too. I probably should have pointed these out. This is what started it all right here. This is Bayle's dictionary, the third edition of the Britannica. This is Chambers' Encyclopedia right here. So this is.
Why don't you pull it over so that people know that's really what you're pointing at, so they don't he only pointed at a book on the shelf. Oh, there you go. Now you can see it.
I don't know if the words were. Look at the beautiful marbling.
There you go.
I love this book. It's so gorgeous. Let me just find the title page so people can really see it.
There you go, folks.
Okay. Well, my poor Britannica. Old and fragile books. But I love them. I love books that were bound in the 17 and 1800s. They really take care of them. The marbling, the leather. Oh my goodness! I spent a whole episode about that. So, going back to Joseph Scaliger's biography, we're going to skip over stuff as usual that's been redundant and used in the others. His proficiency in literature, especially in the history, chronology, and antiquities of Greece and Rome, secured him in 1583 an honorable engagement from Louis de la Roche-Posay, at that time French ambassador at the Pontifical Court, the Pontifical Court being the Church of Rome. The year before, however, he had become a Protestant, which rendered it difficult for him to retain an appointment in France, except that he traveled a good deal at the generous instance of his patron, Roche-Posay, the Bishop of Poitiers, and visited the chief universities of France and Germany, and even found his way to Scotland. We know little of his life between 1565 and 1593. That's Scaliger's life. That's almost 30 years. So really 28 years. So 28 years is a long gap in the biographical chronology of Joseph Scaliger. I recall in my earlier studies an encounter with a man by the name of Sir Francis Walsingham. This man is a spy master for Queen Elizabeth I. Now, he lived in 1532. He was born in 1532, died in 1590. So he was alive around the same time that Joseph was alive. He is known for the vast web of spies, agents, and informants collected over a vast web covering almost the whole of Europe. In his role as spy master, his actions and uncovering of plots lead to, quote, the act for the surety of the Queen's person, end quote. Upon accusations made of him by Mary Queen of Scots, he identifies his role in two statuses as a, quote, private person and a public, quote, secretary of state. We're seeing legalism and Roman law really tying together right here at this time in England. As we saw above in Scotland, was it George Buchanan who, brought back the Roman law into Scotland? So we're going to be getting into this in the future episodes, but we're kind of seeing the underlying tones as we go through Scaliger's life of what's being set up, not just in the United Kingdom, but all across Europe. And this is all hand in hand with Walsingham, the spy master. So this is quoting from Wikipedia. Now, it can be actually checked. There's a lot of people out there who have done studying on Walsingham as a spy master. So there's a lot more information out there, but we're just going to do Wikipedia to be nice and easy and quick.
Well, if I just only held my horses for like 30 seconds, we would have been into the spy stuff, you know.
There's a lot of really
whenever you see this kind of nonsense going on, you know it's a spy cell and all that crap. You know, it doesn't matter if it's 400 or 500 years ago or yesterday.
Now, this is conjecture because I haven't nailed the document yet. It's probably going to be difficult to do, but we can conjecture about it because of the presence. These people are there, and they, you know, if we look at the academics at the time, it's a pretty tightly knit circle of people. They didn't call it the Republic of Letters for nothing. So, Walsingham rose from relative obscurity to become one of the small coterie who directed the Elizabethan state, overseeing foreign, domestic, and religious policy. He served as English ambassador to France, where Scaliger lived, in the early 1570s and witnessed the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which we will get back to in a future show. As principal secretary, he supported exploration, colonization, the use of England's maritime strength, and the Plantation of Ireland. Interesting word there, the Plantation of Ireland. He worked to bring Scotland and England together. We just talked about Scotland and their law recently with George Buchanan. Overall, his foreign policy demonstrated a new understanding of the role of England as a maritime Protestant power in an increasingly global economy. He oversaw operations that penetrated Spanish military preparation, gathered intelligence from across Europe, disrupted a range of plots against Elizabeth, and secured the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. And it was through that trial which led to the Act for the Surety of the Queen's Person. I could have included a lot of really cool information here, but I needed to cut it to keep the show flowing. So in foreign intelligence, Walsingham's extensive network of intelligencers, quote, intelligencers, who passed on general news as well as secrets, spanned Europe and the Mediterranean. While foreign intelligence was a normal part of the principal secretary's activities, Walsingham brought to it flair and ambition and large sums of his own money. And he rose from relative obscurity, and at this time in his life, he has large sums of money. He didn't inherit it, so where did it come from? Especially at that time, it was really difficult to build a wealth. I'm excited to study that. He cast his net more widely than others had done previously, expanding and exploiting links across the continent, as well as in Constantinople and Algiers. We all know about Constantinople and what we're studying, and building and inserting contacts among Catholic exiles.
Among Catholic exiles in Constantinople.
And Algiers, yes.
And for those who don't understand that, it looks very much like Rome was originally in Constantinople in Turkey and not in Italy. You know, when you know, it's claimed that it was moved to Constantinople for a short period and then moved back. But in actuality, it appears that it was built lock, stock, and barrel from the late 13th century into the 14th century.
And it was actually called the New Rome.
And it was actually called the New Rome, yeah.
So, I mean, you can call Constantinople Rome because Rome was a name that it actually did have. So,
you can call it that, or you can't call it.
You can. Yes, indeed, you may.
And Tsargrad, Zarigrad, etc.
That's the name. It's the name it held. I mean, people called it Rome at one time. So among Walsingham's spies may have been the playwright Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe is an interesting character because he's, you know, there's a lot of suppositions about some of the plays he wrote. Marlowe was in France in the mid-1580s and was acquainted with Walsingham's kinsman, Thomas Walsingham. So now you can see that there's a vast web. This wasn't, you know, these are intelligencers, quote, and that's in Walsingham's words, intelligencers, and a vast web that expands all across Europe and the Mediterranean. So it's not impossible to share information with people. It seems to be that, you know, it's quite possible for them to do. All you have to do is be part of the Republic of Letters, and you can pass along your information down the chain that they have. It seems to me they have quite a cool network set up. Don't have the internet, but you do have the Republic of Letters. So...
And the intelligentsia, or intelligencers, excuse me.
Yes, the English intelligencers that are all over the place. So this is a spy network known to exist in the 16th century during the reign of Elizabeth I. It is not inconceivable to conjecture the thought that Joseph Scaliger's time traveling with the French ambassador Louis de la Roche-Posay did not include crossover encounters with intelligence agents during their visits to all the chief universities of France and Germany, extending their journey all the way to Scotland. So returning back to Joseph Scaliger's biography here in Chambers' dictionary, right here, he is conjectured to have traveled in Italy and to have gone as far as Naples. Certain it is, however, that in the year last named, he complied with an invitation of the Dutch government and went to fill the chair of literature vacated by Lipsius at Leiden in Leiden University, where he spent the residue of his days. His labor now consisted chiefly in interpreting and illustrating the classical authors. I'll repeat that: interpreting and illustrating the classical authors. We have said that he far excelled his father in learning, but it should be added that he was not a whit less irritable, arrogant, or vain, that he fully shared the paternal pride of pedigree, spurious as he probably knew his own to be, and that he endeavored to support his father's genealogical fictions in his well-known letter to Dausa on the splendor of the Scaliger family. His writings abound with expressions of hatred and contempt towards his opponents, and he has enriched the vocabulary of learned abuse to an extent well nigh proverbial. That's such a beautiful sentence right there. Well, so he was, however, a man of immense vigor of understanding, and must be credited with having been the first to lay down in his treatise De Emendationem Temporum a complete system of chronology formed upon fixed principles. It was this most learned achievement and his invention of the Julian period that secured him the title of Father of Chronological Science, as we kind of quoted earlier in the biography from 1784 and 61. He was subjected to much emendatory criticism by censors like Padavius, a Jesuit, and also by himself, its errors having been partly corrected by him in his later work. He numbered among his friends the most illustrious scholars of the time, such as Lipsius, Casaubon, Grotius, Heinsius, the Dupuis, Salmais, Vossius, Valère, and Pithou. Now, Hugo Grotius, we'll get into him future when we talk a little bit more about law, but Hugo Grotius was a student of Joseph Scaliger's, and he wrote The Law of War and Peace. And basically, it's really interesting. He lays the foundation of a lot of international law. So we're seeing legalism really kind of tying up.
So we're seeing the push out of natural law and the incoming man's law, Roman law, etc., personhood, all of that stuff that we've been covering in recent episodes.
During this century, we're seeing quite a massive struggle all throughout Europe between the Protestants and the Church of Rome, and I'm sure a lot of other people. Basically, they're trying to lay down the foundations of their law, and they're trying to take over the land, and that also includes property. I can't conjecture a lot of these things off the top of my head. There's so much information I can share, but I can't include it with this presentation because it'll take forever. But it will be covered in a future episode.
Sure.
But we really need to keep moving here because I don't want to keep our audience until midnight. So now we're moving on to the Encyclopedia Britannica 9th edition, the R.S. Peale reprint with American revisions and additions. This was published in 1893. So my initial design for this outline includes the 11th edition of the Britannica. While reading the articles, I observed that many details for Joseph's life are the same from Richard Copley Christie in the 9th, though there are some details added to the biography of Julius in the 11th edition by Sir John Edwin Sandys. He's a fellow of St. John's College, Cambridge, and also a fellow of the British Academy. So you can see the chain of command here. In the 9th edition, Richard Copley Christie, it's pretty interesting. So Sir Israel Gallants has also contributed to the 11th edition Britannica, by the way. Mark Pattison, cited earlier, and Jacob Bernays are new sources relied upon from the 9th edition up. And Mark Pattison is a student of Jacob Bernays. Now let's look at Richard Copley Christie. Richard Copley Christie, born in 1830 and died in 1901, was an English lawyer, university teacher, philanthropist, and bibliophile. He was born at Lenton in Nottinghamshire, the son of a mill owner. He was educated at Lincoln College, Oxford, where he was tutored by Mark Pattison and was called at the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 1857. He also held numerous academic appointments, notably the professorship of history and of political economy at Owens College. So what we're seeing here is Jacob Bernays teaches Mark Pattison. Mark Pattison teaches Richard Copley Christie, and they all seem to write these articles about Joseph Scaliger. Very interesting. And not only that, Richard Copley Christie then has the foundation piece, which Sir John Edwin Sandys, fellow of the British Academy, then incorporates with his article, which he basically uses all of it, excludes some, adds a little bit, changes the sentences here and there, but pretty much it's the same article that Copley Christie wrote. Very, very, very interesting the way that chain of command of knowledge goes.
So what you're looking at is a clear cell here, you know.
Yeah, it's just boom, 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 all the way up. It just all ties back to Bernays and his scholarship, and they are the ones that are making this into the foremost encyclopedic dictionaries that exist in our time. So, Scaliger and the ninth.
The foremost.
So Scaliger.
Oh.
For some account of the great Della Scala, that's Latin Scaliger family, the reader is referred to the article of Verona. The name has also been borne by two scholars of extraordinary eminence in the world of letters. It's curious the way they paint that.
Well, you know, and there was also England, Australia, etc. They have an honorary doctorate, which is the highest doctorate you can get, actually, and it's the Doctor of Letters. And, you know, everybody that I've seen, like, who was it? Mark Twain, what's his real name? He was a Doctor of Letters. Inya, the woman from Inya, was voted a Doctor of Letters. The redheaded comedian guy a couple years ago was voted a Doctor of Letters. But everybody that I've connected into that is Intel as well.
It's quite fascinating. Well, if you look at the Rhodes Scholarship even, I mean, there's a lot of dirty stuff that kind of connects with that as well. The Roundtable Group and Carol Quigley, I mean, it all kind of goes back. And these books are really important, but they're really important to study for a number of reasons, not just the knowledge, but the fallacies. So Julius Caesar Scaliger, this is the Ninth Britannica, 1484 to 1558, so distinguished by his learning and talents that, according to Dethau, no one of the ancients could be placed above him. No one of the ancients could be placed above him. And the age in which he lived, so let's see, there's a difference there. The ancients, so before Julius, none of them could stand above him, and nor, in the age in which he lived, could not show his equal. So, let me just rephrase that back into the original sentence. No one of the ancients could be placed above him, and the age in which he lived could not show his equal, was, according to his own account, a scion of the illustrious house of La Scala, for 150 years princes of Verona, and was born in 1484 at the castle of La Rocca on the Lago di Garda. So now we're here in 1893. We're still going with, Julius's account on it, even though it's been proven false repeatedly by people, but they're still going to make the false claim of where he lived, and instead of digging in and finding the truth of what his actual history was and sharing it with the public. No. We have to continually paint this fable. When are we going to get over this and actually just call the guy for what he is? I mean, just get rid of this. Put this at the end of the article and talk about all the things he got wrong and all the things he lied to people about, and make that what the section is. Don't introduce the public in the first paragraph with that, because a lot of times people aren't going to read the whole article. They're just going to read that first paragraph, that second paragraph, just like they read the newspaper, because they're always taught to read the newspaper. That's most information is right there at the top. Everything else is just kind of fodder as it goes through. Here we are, again, 1893, and also in 1911, in the 11th edition Britannica, saying this. So I'll just exclude my blurb because I kind of already just said it. Here's an excerpt during the fantastical fables of Julius's early life, which he purports to serve under Emperor Maximilian, since similar to Chambers' encyclopedia, David Irving, and et al. Quote, but he was unmindful neither of letters, in which he had the most eminent scholars of the day as his interpreters, nor of art. This is why now we're including art into Julius's his life, which he studied with considerable success under Albrecht Dürer, who was quite famous in his time. So how is he meeting all these people? Is it because, he was born of a noble lineage, or was he a pauper? Was his dad a professor, and that's what connected him to Albrecht Dürer? Where is the real history, and why do we have to continually obfuscate this stuff to the public? We're supposed to be students reading these books. Why are we misleading people down this line? Doesn't make any sense. Just tell it like it is. Okay, He determined to take holy orders in the expectations that he would become in due time cardinal and then be elected pope, when he would wrest from the Venetians his principality of Verona, of which the Republic had despoiled his ancestors. Don Quixote here, is he chasing windmills here now? Like, what is going on? So, but though he soon gave up this design, he remained at the university until 1519. The next 6 years. Now, did he really go to the university now? Because we're linking false history with university attendance now. Where's the truth? Where's the lies? Now you're requiring the person who's reading the article to do the work that the person writing the article should have done originally.
Right.
So the next 6 years...
Onus of proof on these people is reversed.
It's insane. I mean, I love doing this. It's a lot of fun. It's better than playing video games or watching really bad television, but... these puzzles do kind of beat the dungeon.
Don't make me spit buttered coffee everywhere.
So the next 6 years he passed at the castle of Vico Nuovo in Piedmont as the guest of the family of Rovere. At first dividing his time, Rovere is the man who takes him to Agen, the Bishop of Agen. At first dividing his time between military expeditions in the summer and study, chiefly of medicine and natural history in the winter, until a severe attack of rheumatic gout brought his military career to a close. All of these aspects of his life are questionable. You don't actually write. And the other thing about this is Thomas Birch and Pierre Bayle are very kind and generous to their readers because they put all the citations. Whenever they make a claim about their life, they follow it up with the title of the book, the author, what volume it's in, the year it was published, the publisher, the city it was in. I mean, he is thorough. Not he, they are thorough. Bayle and Birch are thorough in presenting this information so people can check him. But as we move up through these encyclopedias, they get taken away from the columns. They're not included inside the passages. And sometimes they get buried at the bottom, but they're not going to give you page numbers. They're not going to give you book numbers. They're not going to give you anything. They give you the title and they give you the name of the author and they say, go read the whole book. Because back then they didn't have the internet. They didn't have the option of having a PDF and a hard copy and then going into the PDF and then searching for those keywords and then going to the hard copy and verifying that actually exists in the hard copy and seeing it. You can't just take this. It takes weeks upon weeks for people to do the study, and that takes me, 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes a few days. Sometimes it's hard to chase a citation, and that's the thrill of it. Is like the fun of actually finding it. It's like hunting.
Yeah, it's the hunt. Yeah, exactly. that's what it's all about.
And it's not just what you find; it's what you learn on the way to it. Because
that's what forensic research is all about, man.
It's so much fun. It's the funnest thing in the world to do. I mean, I'd love to do this just forever.
Yeah, and it's like you're taking down these, huge frauds, these whales, these elephants, whatever they are, whatever you're hunting, and it's like, it doesn't matter if it was the 1950s CIA or 15th century stuff. It's still, it's still the same premise how it all works.
Yeah, they keep their style, and it's just like Bernays, propaganda, and the Bernays, the propagandist of Scaliger, and you're looking at these styles. I know we've talked about it in past episodes, so I won't digress too far,
sure.
But it's just...
We can do a quick rehash there for those who didn't go back and are just about to when we're done here.
So we're seeing the history of sophistry, fallacy, and propaganda, and it's extending all the way back,
and intelligence, don't forget that.
And intelligence. As we're seeing these networks, we're seeing literary networks, spy networks. They're all starting to shoot up now. And what seemed like was, a very rough, dark age where people couldn't communicate and they were all basically stuck in these little pockets. That's the common man. And there's a big difference between the common man and the private man, the man that has landed property, the man that has the money to be able to send letters and go on trips and, has friends like, the Bishop, La Roche-Posay, I'll just say his name, La Roche-Posay, who is a family of considerable wealth, who can take you on all the journeys to all the great universities all throughout Europe. You can read all the manuscripts. You can get all the best teachers. The world is given to people who have the access, even at that time.
Here's my issue is, so this stuff is, going on from the 1600s. So, from the end of the Dark Ages, you have the Renaissance. I mean, because people were, just stupid, dumb as rocks. They couldn't, read, they couldn't even wipe their asses at that point. They just like, and they kind of just dug around in the dirt and stuff. This is the the official story that we're told, but yet suddenly in this short period of time from the end of the Dark Ages, everything just sprung up, the way it was. Like, you have intelligence networks and a history of academia and everything, and it's just like, suddenly there again. It didn't have to evolve and develop. It's just, boom, and dropped right back in. Or maybe you just delete the Dark Age and then the problem is solved.
Yeah, it's a good way to cover up your old networks if you messed up some things and you wanted to just completely...
Yeah, or even, you could maybe even cover up, say, an empire, like Tartary.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, it's funny. You can just look at maps from the 1600s and you can see...
and just to show the audience really quickly what we're talking about, for those of you who haven't seen it, so there was a massive empire called Tartary that took up like most of the globe at the time. I mean, it was just effing huge, and it's in all of the maps, but they've erased it from our history, and they've called it hordes, and they even renamed Tartary. They turned the meaning of Tartary into hell.
Yep.
It's a complete inversion of everything that Tartary was, but they erased the whole history of it, and then all of a sudden you have the appearance of like 14 countries that show up that were all former Tartary. Anyway, go ahead. Let's keep going.
And just so people, just to verify, I do have the 9th edition Britannica.
So all you liars and deceivers and adversaries out there, you can can it and find something else to pick on.
So let's see where we are here. It's military career to close. I believe that's where we stopped. So we're still on Julius. Henceforth, his life was wholly devoted to study. In 1525, he accompanied M.A. de Rovere, Bishop of Agen, to the city as his physician. Such is the outline of his own account of his early life. It was not until some time after his death that the enemies of his son first alleged that he was not of the family of La Scala, but was a son of Benedetto Bordoni, an illuminator or schoolmaster of Verona, that he was educated at Padua, where he took the degree of M.D., and that his story of his life and adventures before arriving at Agen was a tissue of fables. You're burning this stuff down further in the articles you go through. It's like, put it up at the top. This is the most important stuff right here. Put the fable at the end. I mean, maybe it's just the editor and me speaking, but I don't know. And that his story of his life and adventures before arriving in Agen was a tissue of fables. It's certainly supported by no other evidence than his own statements, some of which are inconsistent with well-asserted facts. A few days after his arrival at Agen, he fell in love with a charming orphan of 13. Now we're seeing orphan.
And yeah. he fell in love with... Oh, dude, so, we're already back to Pizzagate in ancient times, man.
A charming orphan of 13, and yet de Lobchek. Now, earlier...
Wait, what page are we on here? 15?
Yeah, we're on 14, just going into 15.
All right, here we go.
So this is new information. Nowhere in the past citations was it mentioned that and yet de Lobchek was an orphan. It is stated that her family objected to the marriage of the man 3 times her senior, not her friends, as stated below. Quote, her friends objected to her marriage with an unknown adventurer, but in 1528, he had obtained so much success as a physician that the objections of her family were overcome. See, and then he goes and introduces his family. So this is extended family, as a direct family, be specific.
And now imagine just really quickly, people, this adult man chasing a 13, 14, 15-year-old for 3 years, He
was 42 years old when he met her, and she was 13. I mean, that's disgusting. I mean, disgusting in our standards, and people may excuse it, like, oh, maybe back in the day that was perfectly acceptable. Yeah.
Oh, well, hey, the ancient Greeks were pedophiles, so therefore, appeal to tradition, it's like, appeal to Peter Lamborn Wilson horseshit.
It seems more like, she's, you look at the role of women at that time, and it's like, it's not like she chose this, she was in love with him. There's a lot of arrangements probably going in the background.
But she was an orphan. He probably just went in there and adopted her.
I know, but she's an orphan. She has landed property. that she's going to inherit.
Yeah, and yeah.
So
Jacob,
her family's
there's no
like,
contradiction there, you know.
I mean, the only thing that I can see is that everybody else neglected to say that she was an orphan and just said that her family, as in her extended family, without, specifically saying it was extended family, like her brothers and sisters maybe, or her aunts and uncles. Who knows? We won't know. Instead, we're just going to keep it as vague as possible. Just touch upon this 13-year-old girl who, somehow wins the desire of Julius, and we're going to go from there. So, a charge of heresy in 1538, of which he was acquitted by his friendly judges, one of whom was his friend, Arnauld de Ferran, that's not a conflict of interest, was almost the only event of interest during these 29 years, except the publication of his books and the quarrels and criticisms to which they gave rise. So he's charged with heresy, has friendly judges, and his friend acquits him. Yeah, that's nothing shady going on there. There's no.
It's almost like the CIA agents going around doing all of this nasty stuff, and then on the side pretending like they're pro freedom while they're promoting sex, drugs, rock and roll. And then you have like the judges getting them off over on this side because they're not actually supposed to be operating in the U.S. and all of this. I can see the same identical pattern going on here from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I mean, surely there's conflict of interest even back then. If they're laying the foundations of Roman law, I'd like to go back and see if there's anything in that within their writings about them.
Yeah, and why be doing it at that time? Isn't that about probably the time that Tartary fell? Huh. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Go ahead.
So now we're going to go on to Joseph Scaliger's biography in the 9th edition Britannica, the R.S. Peale reprint Britannica. Still Richard Copley Christie who writes the article. The greatest scholar of modern times was the 10th child and 3rd son of Julius Caesar Scaliger and Andiat de Roch-Lobjak. Joseph was also required each day to write a Latin theme or declamation, though in other respects he seems to have been left to his own devices. The Latin verses of Julius, faulty as it is in all that constitutes poetry, it yet displays a more extensive knowledge of the Latin language and a greater command of its resources than is to be found in the verse of any of his contemporaries. And this constant practice in writing and reading or speaking Latin under the supervision of one who knew the language thoroughly was probably the foundation of Joseph's Latin scholarship. But the companionship of his father was worth more to Joseph than any mere instruction. And that's true. I mean, companionship with anyone's father is worth more than anything. It's a very valuable experience. And, if you have children, fathers out there, spend every moment that you have with them. There's so much to learn from them, and there's so much they can learn from you. But let's continue. He learned from Julius what real knowledge was, and that it did not consist in discussions on words and phrases. And to his father he owed it that he was not a mere scholar, but something more, an acute observer, never losing sight of the actual world, and aiming not so much at correcting texts as at laying the foundation of a science of historical criticism. And we're seeing the science of criticism, which was so beautifully written in Chambers' encyclopedia. Let me see if I can find that quote real quick. Oh, it's so good. We're on page 14 or 15, right?
Yeah, 15.
Probably going to miss it. Yeah, I think I went too far.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'm just going to pass on. It's okay. I'll just keep going here. So, the name of Jean Durat then stood as high as that of Turnebus as a Greek scholar and far higher as a professor. I'll just say the science of historical criticisms, we're looking at the science of fallacies and name calling. That's what it basically was going to go to. So the name of Jean Durat then stood as high as that of Turnebus as a Greek scholar and far higher as a professor. As a teacher, he was able not only to impart knowledge, but to kindle enthusiasm. It was to Durat that Scaliger owed the home which he found for the next 30 years of his life, those 30 dark years of his life, which we don't know much about. In 1563, the professor recommended him to Louis de Chastaigne, the young lord of La Roche-Posay, as a companion in his travels. A close friendship sprang up between the two young men, which remained unbroken till the death of Louis in 1595.
Huh. And right about the time when Joseph Scaliger shows right back up.
Yeah, and right around the time that Walsingham dies too, I believe.
So he was in a gay relationship for 28 years, and then
You kind of wonder about that. I don't know. I don't know much about Lewis. A lot of the information out there is in French. So to our French audience that's watching tonight, I would love to do a little study session for you guys to kind of teach me about him. It'd be really interesting. The travels first went to Rome. Here they found Marc Antoine Muritas, who, when at Bordeaux and Toulouse, had been a great favorite and occasional visitor of Julius Caesar at Agen. Muritas soon recognized Scaliger's merits and devoted himself to making his stay at Rome as agreeable as possible, introducing him to all the men that were worth knowing. Now, this is Justus Scaliger, who earlier was always quoted as, the man who didn't really have much of a biography to tell because he was always so shut up in his books. He never spent much time as a social man, obviously, but here we are being introduced to all the men that were worth knowing. After visiting a large part of Italy...
But wait. But he's boring but knows everybody. Huh.
Yeah,
interesting.
He's boring but knows everybody, has a gap of 30 years, but is visiting the most interesting people all around the world. What is it? Okay, so after visiting a large part of Italy, the travelers passed to England and Scotland, taking, as it would seem, La Roche-Posay on their way, for Scaliger's preface to his first book, Conjectania in Veronum, is dated there in December 1564. So that confirms him being there. So Scaliger formed an unfavorable opinion of the English. Their inhuman disposition and inhospitable treatment of foreigners especially impressed him. He was also disappointed in finding few Greek manuscripts and few learned men. It's curious about the Greek manuscripts part of it there too. Maybe there wasn't much that existed at that time. It was not until, that's a conjecture, it was not until a much later period that he became intimate with Richard Thompson and other Englishmen. Richard Thompson is an interesting man. Let's see, he was a Dutch-born English theologian and translator. He was fellow of Clare Hall, Cambridge, and the translator of Marshall's epigrams, and among the first Westminster Company, charged by James I of England with a translation of the first 12 books of the King James Version of the Bible. He was also known for his intemperance and his doctrinal belief in Arminianism. So we got a drunk who translated the King James Version of the Bible, who is friends with Scaliger. Very interesting. Especially when you look at the Bible and you see how the words are all changed around and they mean completely different things when you trace it back to their source.
Yeah, as Clint's been showing, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that Joseph Scaliger is friends with the guys that are making these translations. In the course of his travels, he became a Protestant. His father, though he lived and died in the communion of the Church of Rome, had been suspected of heresy, which he was acquitted by his friend, and it is probable that Joseph's sympathies were early enlisted on the side of Protestantism. On his return to France, he spent 3 years with the Chastagners, accompanying them to their different chateaux in Poitou, as the calls of the Civil War required their presence. In 1570, he accepted the invitation of Cujas and proceeded to Valence to study jurisprudence under the greatest living jurist, which we'll be covering in the future in a lot more detail. Here he remained 3 years, profiting not only by the lectures, but even more by the library of Cujas, which filled no less than 7 or 8 rooms and included 500 manuscripts. Now, I'm just going to do a little aside here. It's kind of from my research that we're going to be doing in the next show. But an interesting thing about Cujas' library is that when he died, he ordered in his will, apparently, to disperse all of his books and documents among all of his friends and family and people he worked with, and pretty much all of it is lost. All gone. These valuable books and manuscripts that supposedly existed, and nobody can find them. Real shame that you have a library like that instead of putting it in whole and donating it to a university or so students can go and access it, or keeping it within your family line if you have somebody to pass it.
If you're Scaliger, you don't want anybody to check your citations, right?
Indeed. Or you want to control and have the documents yourself and not let anyone else have to see it.
Because what would academics do for the next 400 or 500 years? But they'd have to clean the lint out of their navels or something.
Yeah, and so it's, you can claim that there wasn't a Barnes and Noble or something back in the day, and they didn't have access to books, but Jacques Cujas has 7 or 8 rooms filled and 500 manuscripts. So obviously people do get books. And it seems that Joseph Scaliger particularly had generous access to knowledge.
Now,
from the Republic
500 manuscripts, would that take up 700-800 rooms? That doesn't seem like it would be that large. Maybe two rooms?
It included. That's included.
Okay.
So there's books on top of that. That's just icing on the cake, is he had manuscripts. And generally these manuscripts, original documents, primary sources that people can go to. I'd love to find out where they went, or if they ever existed, or if they were burnt. Who knows? It's an interesting history, but it's something I haven't had, obviously, time to really digest. But we will talk about Jacques Cujas a little bit more.
All right, let's wrap this up.
Well, we'll try to. We're making good time here, I guess, considering. Discarding the trivial remarks and groundless suggestions, which we find in the editions of nearly all his contemporaries and predecessors, he first laid down and applied sound rules of criticisms and emendation, and changed textual criticism from a series of haphazard and frequently baseless guesses into a, quote, rational procedure subject to fixed laws, end quote, sourced Pattison. That's Mark Pattison who says that about Scaliger. But these works, while proving Scaliger's right to the foremost place among his contemporaries as far as Latin scholarship and criticism were concerned, did not go beyond mere scholarship. It was reserved for his edition of Manilius in 1579 and his De Emendatione Temporum in 1583 to revolutionize all received ideas of chronology of ancient history, to show for the first time that ancient chronology was the highest importance as a corrector as well as a supplement to historical narrative, that ancient history is not confined to that of the Greeks and Romans, but also comprises that of the Persians, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians, hitherto neglected as absolutely worthless. That's an interesting question mark. It always pops in my head when I read that passage. Like, why were they considered worthless? So, and that of the Jews, hitherto treated as a thing apart and too sacred to be mixed up with the others, and that the historical narratives and fragments of each of these, and their several systems of chronology, must be carefully and critically compared together, if any true and general conclusions on ancient history are to be arrived at. It is this which constitutes his glory, and which places Scaliger on so immeasurably higher in eminence than any of his contemporaries. Yet, while the scholars of his time admitted his preeminence, neither they nor those immediately followed seem to have appreciated his real merit, but to have considered his emendatory criticism and his skill in Greek as constituting his claim to special greatness. So they didn't even think about his history was this great stuff. They're like, he was good at Greek. Scaliger's great works in historical criticism had overstepped any power of appreciation which the succeeding age possessed. That's Pattison who says that.
Talk about one massive ad veracundium. The guy blows so much smoke up everybody's ass, they actually think he's credible, and he's just, like other people that you and I have dealt with recently that were just complete frauds and blowing smoke, and they give this air of credibility, but meanwhile, they're complete, frauds or hucksters,
They paint them, they color them up with adjectives to cover up.
Yes. You're a chess champion. You're give me some a person a fake title.
It's really interesting. It's like, yeah, he's a really bad guy, but we're gonna go back and paint a rosy picture. But here's some really ugly stuff about the guy, but he's actually a really good guy. But no, see, they're always kind of covering up the poop. So his commentary on Manilius is really a treatise on the astronomy of the ancients. And it forms an introduction to the De Emendatium Temporum, in which he examines by the light of modern and Copernican science the ancient system as applied to epochs, calendars, and computations of time, showing upon what principles they are based. In the remaining 24 years of his life, he at once corrected and enlarged the basis which he had laid in the De Emendatione with incredible patience, sometimes with a happy audacity of conjecture, which itself is almost genius. He succeeded in reconstructing the lost chronicle of Eusebius, one of the most precious remains of antiquity, and one of the highest values for ancient chronology. And I have a lot of notes on that, but we'll do that in the next episode, or the one after that. This he printed in 1606 in his Thesaurus Temporum, in which he collected, restored, and arranged every chronological relic extant in Greek and Latin. So now there's going to be a bit of a gap here in the article because a lot of the stuff that would be read has already been said. So we're going to go to the University of Leiden, and they're trying to acquire his services.
This is page 17.
Yeah, so we're on page 17, second half. So University of Leiden first made a request to Joseph to go and study there or teach there, but he rejected it. So after rejecting their first invitation, the invitation was renewed in the most gratifying and flattering manner a year later. Scaliger would not be required to lecture. The university only wished for his presence. He would be in all respects the master of his time. This offer Scaliger provisionally accepted. His reception at Leiden was all he could wish. A handsome income was assured to him. He was treated with the highest consideration. His rank as a prince of Verona was recognized. Really? Placed midway between The Hague and Amsterdam, he was able to obtain, beside the learned circle of Leiden, the advantages of the best society of both these capitals. For Scaliger was no hermit, buried among his books. He was fond of social intercourse with persons of merit and intelligence, and was himself a good talker. But he was always shut up reading his books and didn't really have much of a life worth talking about.
Well, and he wouldn't want to lecture because then people could ask him questions and call him out as a fraud, So of course you would avoid lecturing.
It's like, oh, these questions, I don't want to have to deal with them, so I'm just going to go and just study all day long and write my histories and my classical criticisms. So it's so fascinating seeing this just going all the way down the line. So for the first 7 years of his residence at Leiden, his reputation was at its highest point. His literary dictatorship was unquestioned. It was greater in kind and in extent than that of any man since the revival of letters. The revival of letters that his father did. Greater even than that of Erasmus had been. From his throne at Leiden, he ruled. From his throne at Leiden, he ruled the learned world. And a word from him could make or mar a rising reputation. So this king of sophistry and fallacy, and his horrible attitude towards people he hated who were different than him,
or who question his bullshit.
Yeah, he was in control of all of that. So now we're starting to see everything here. Here's the man.
It's like the Huxley family in more modern times. Thomas and Aldous and Julian just stroking everybody off with this fake academia.
It's so. Oh man, we're going to cover that in more detail too about the reputation. I actually have a very good specific example of this that I'll cover in great detail. So the electric force of his genius drew to him all the rising talent of the Republic. So all of the intelligent people in the Republic of Letters, all the people that were well-learned and well-read, were gravitating towards him. So he was surrounded by young men eager to listen to and profit by his conversation. And he enjoyed nothing better than to discuss with them the books they were reading and the men who wrote them, and to open up by his suggestive remarks, the true methods and objects of philological and historical study. He encouraged Grotius, author of The Law of War and Peace, when he was only a youth of 16, to edit Capella. The early death of the younger Dauza he wept as that of a beloved son. Daniel Heinsius, from being his favorite pupil, became his most intimate friend. Daniel Heinsius, who we'll talk about later, becomes the head librarian of the University of Leiden and has control over all the documents, manuscripts, books, and who can see them. But Scaliger had made numerous enemies. He hated ignorance, but he hated still more half-learning, and most of all dishonesty in argument or in quotation. Lest you forget,
the king of bullshit, literally on his high throne.
He's just like his father. So lest we forget, Joseph published the history of his noble family name and history based on dubious assertions and fictional proofs claimed by his father, which he never checked. So going back to the article, himself the soul of honor and truthfulness, himself the soul as SOUL, soul of honor and truthfulness, with a single aim in all his writings, namely to arrive at the truth, he had no toleration for the disingenuous arguments.
Who is writing this crap?
This is Richard Copley Christie, the student of Mark Pattison, who's a student of Jacob Bernays, who wrote the biography of Scaliger.
Yeah, wow. You feel sorry for students who actually, believe this crap as they were reading it, and then propagated
right down the line.
Right down the line, it's like, well, everybody says he's honest and truthful, so we don't need to check anything, and he didn't need to check his dad, and it's all just a historical stream of
fallacy.
To put it politely, I guess. Sure.
We're appealing to his authority, and his authority is questionable,
and he never makes the onus of proof. He always counterattacks whenever he's to make the onus of proof.
Exactly, and we covered in part 1 and part 2 with when I was doing Paulus Emilius's article, which showed that Scioppius actually had a sound argument. Just because he got some facts wrong, the premise was still correct. And Scaliger attacked everything he got wrong, and said because he got all this other information wrong, this thing they actually got correct is therefore invalid now.
That's poisoning the well. Wow, yeah. You got to go point by point. So clearly Scaliger had no ability to use logic. He was just pure unadulterated sophistry.
Yeah, if we go back to the second dictionary I read from, a general and biographical dictionary. I mean, they quoted, was it Ovid? I'm probably misstating that, but basically, this world of letters, is supposed to make people more civilized, but in Scaliger's terms, it made them, much more of a savage. So,
if you're lying to everybody and feeding them a pile of horse shit for 400 or 500 years, how does that elevate them into knowledge and truth if it's all crap?
Yeah, I mean, his father spent decades, if not a lifetime, lying about his history. It seems like they have the propensity to carry a lot of baggage when it comes to bullshit.
Huh? Maybe that's why Edward Bernays' own grandfather wrote the biography. You think? Anyway, let's go on. He's
the grandfather of all the sophistry that we're seeing in propaganda. So let's see here. Neither in his conversation nor in his writings did he conceal his contempt for the ignorant and the dishonest. His pungent sarcasms were soon carried to the ears of the persons of whom they were uttered, and his pen was not less bitter than his tongue. So people from long distances were getting this information and sharing it. It wasn't like they published it and it was lost on a library shelf and nobody got the book. People got the information. He resembles his father in his arrogant tone towards those whom he despises and those whom he hates. And
anybody who tells the truth. Go ahead.
Yeah. So he resembles his father in his arrogant tone towards those whom he despises and those whom he hates. And he despises and hates all who differ from him. He is conscious of his power as a literary dictator, and not always sufficiently cautious or sufficiently gentle in its exercise. Nor, and it must be admitted, was Scaliger always right. He trusted much to his memory, which was occasionally treacherous. His emendations, if frequently happy, were sometimes absurd. In laying the foundations of a science of ancient chronology, he relied sometimes upon groundless, sometimes even absurd hypotheses, frequently upon an imperfect induction of facts. Sometimes he misunderstood the astronomical science of the ancients, sometimes that of Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. And he was no mathematician. But his enemies were not merely those whose errors he had exposed and whose hostility he had excited by the violence of his language. The results of his system of historical criticism had been adverse to the Catholic controversialists and to the authenticity of many of the documents upon which they had been accustomed to rely. The Jesuits, who aspired to be the expounders of antiquity, the source of all scholarship and criticism, perceived that the writings and authority of Scaliger were the most formidable barrier to their claims. It was a day of conversion.
Wait. Okay, you got to correct me because I seem to have it wrong that Scaliger and Petavius were Jesuits.
No,
So
Scaliger is definitely a Protestant, but I mean, he's got 30 years of a gap in his life that we're still trying to put together. So,
so was it was Petavius that was a Jesuit then, right?
yeah, he was, and if I'm going off the top of my head, so forgive me if this is slightly incorrect, but I know they were associated, and I feel like Dennis Patel may have been a student of Scaliger's. And
Yeah,
maybe that's
well, that's what I have. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that's where the connection comes from. But there's like a dialectic now that's kind of going here, where one's fighting the other.
All right, I'm just
It kind of muddies the waters a little bit more with chronology when you got two people kind of fighting against each other, would have obviously interests that go beyond the truth.
yeah. So I've just got Dennis Patel on screen, so I've got him as Society of Jesus Jesuits, and this is Scaliger's main student. So is Petavius an infiltrator, or is that just another nonsense cover story like usual? It's like, here's the Jesuits working with them hand in hand, side by side, and then, complaining, we can't get past Scaliger.
There's there's a lot I can share right now, but it starts to kind of reveal things that are going to go down the road.
All right. Let's just bring it back. Sorry.
I'm still acquiring sources.
Yeah.
So, but it's going to be a lot of fun once we get there. Oh boy! So it was a day of conversions. Muratus, in the latter part of his life, professed the strictest orthodoxy. Lipsius had been reconciled to the Church of Rome. Casaubon was supposed to be wavering, but Scaliger was known to be hopeless. And as long as his supremacy was unquestioned, the Protestants had the victory in learning and scholarship. So what you're kind of seeing there is the Protestants versus the Church of Rome, and that's the dialectic we're kind of seeing here. But what are the real interests? What are the real interests of the Protestants, and what they're behind, and what are the Jesuits? And like these are questions that need to be explored a lot further, but it's not something I can do right now in this show. Let's see, where was I? Let's see. A determined attempt must be made, if not to answer his criticisms or to disprove his statements, yet to attack him as a man and to destroy his reputation. This was no easy task, for his moral character was absolutely spotless. Again, the paintbrush goes and covers up the shit they just said a few minutes ago. His moral character was absolutely spotless, but he, was a vicious, vile, had violence of language and was, horrible towards people and had showed contempt and hated all of mankind. But his moral character was absolutely spotless.
How does this author hold all of these contrary positions in mind while he writes this crap?
That's fascinating. I'm reading this stuff and I'm just like, okay, my mind's going this way, now my mind's going this way, my mind's going this way. It's like if somebody punching me in the head here, punching me in the head here. Like, what's going on? You can't just have those inconsistencies. It's not.
The contradiction is always a liar and error. Hello, folks, wake up.
And then you see the jumbling of the historical narratives of Julius's life, and they keep putting that fable up at the top. It's messy stuff.
All right, so what do we have? About 3-4 pages left? We're at 7 o'clock here.
Yeah, we're starting to wrap it up here. A few more pages, and trust me, they're going to be good. After several scurrilous attacks by the Jesuit party in which coarseness and violence were more conspicuous than ability, in 1607, a new and more successful attempt was made. Scaliger's weak point was his pride. Brought up by his father, whom he greatly reverenced, in the belief that he was a prince of Verona, he never forgot this himself, nor suffered it to be forgotten by others. Naturally truthful, honorable, and virtuous in every respect, he conceived himself especially bound to be so on account of his illustrious ancestry. Wow.
Like you have to. What was that guy's name again?
Which guy?
The guy that you're just reading from.
This is Richard Colby Christie's article in the 9th edition Britannica.
Wow, he is just a sophist beast.
Oh, yeah.
How do you... Wow! That's more bullshit than... I bet, a modern CIA agent would be jealous of that SOB right there, man.
It's fascinating the way that he, paints the... he includes some of the bad information about him, the things they kind of show that he's not a good guy. And then they go and be like, but he's the most moral and virtuous character. But we're not going to support that with any evidence. But there is evidence about him being really bad. But where's all the virtue? These are all things, just basic things that people say without any supporting documents or evidence. I know. So the author must forget what he wrote. I should just said that. The author must forget what he wrote 2 paragraphs prior. And that was my statement to that. Anyway, in 1594, in an evil hour for his happiness and his reputation, he published his Epistola de Vetustate et Splendore Gentis Scaligeri et Julius Caesar Scaligeri Vita. In 1607, Gaspar Scioppius, then in the service of the Jesuits, we just set up the Jesuits just a few paragraphs earlier, whom he afterwards so bitterly libeled, published his Scaliger Hypovolemius, or the Supposititious Scaliger, a quarto volume of more than 400 pages. Now let's talk about how long it is instead of the really important part about it. Written with consummate ability, in an admirable and incisive style, with the entire disregard for truth, which Scioppius always displayed. Yeah, he's a liar, but that one thing he did actually get right, which is the most important part. So anyway, written with consummate ability, in an admirable and incisive style, with the entire disregard for truth, which Scioppius always displayed, and with all the power of that sarcasm in which he was an accomplished master. So they're painting Scioppius as being the sophist and Scaliger as being the victim.
Well, isn't that what sophists do? They always flip it.
Project it on somebody else.
Yeah. That's the oldest trick in the book.
Scioppius got the one thing right, and who cares if he's a Jesuit or not? That one thing was right. So every piece of gossip or scandal which could be raked together respecting Scaliger or his family is to be found there. So don't read it, guys. Hint, hint. The author professes to point out 500 lies in the Epistola de Vetustate of
500 lies.
But the main argument of the book is to show the falsity of his pretensions to be of the family of La Scala and of the narrative of his father's early life, and to hold up both father and son to contempt and ridicule as impudent impostors. Quote, no stronger proof, says Mr. Pattison, can be given of the impressions produced by this powerful Philippic dedicated to the defamation of an individual than that it has been the source from which the biography of Scaliger, as it now stands in our biographical collections, has mainly flowed. So essentially, everything about Scaliger came from Scioppius, apparently. But when I checked the sources of Thomas Birch in 1734, a lot of the stuff comes from Joseph Scaliger in there, from his own books. Scioppius is only quoted, I think, once in that article. I don't think he's quoted in Joseph Scaliger's articles and Julius's. But in Joseph's own, it's all coming from his own hand. So I don't know where he got that from, because my research shows something completely different. So to Scaliger, the blow was crushing. Whatever the case as to Julius, Joseph had undoubtedly believed himself a prince of Verona, and in his Epistola had put forth with the most perfect good faith, and relying partly on his own memory, partly on his father's good faith, he has not verified one of the statements of Julius, most of which, to speak most favorably, as characterized by rhodomontante, exaggeration or inaccuracy. Now, rhodomontate, it means vain boasting, empty bluster or vaunting, a rant. Quote, I could show that the rhodomontantes of Almanzor are neither so irrational nor impossible. And as a verb in transitive, it means to boast, to brag, to bluster, or to rant. And that's in Webster's 1828. Just for anyone that was wondering what that word meant. He immediately wrote...
Wow, man.
That's a word not used by anybody.
I got to ask you, Jacob. I got to interrupt you here for a second. Have you thought of what Scaliger would say to you if he was responding to all of this?
It would be absolutely epic. I don't even know, because whatever I say probably wouldn't do it justice.
I mean, the ship flows downstream, and this flows all the way into Edward Bernays and the whole modern propaganda. I mean, this is the foundation of.
There's a lot. I mean, I kind of wonder what he would say about anybody that was writing about him, because you have to blow smoke up everybody's, or up his ass for, to impress him. And you can't tell any truth, Yeah, you can't question Scaliger. So the fact that I'm questioning him, he probably he'd probably write, a 500-page document about how I may have gotten a few things wrong, but then never actually address any of the clear points of what I made, which is the actual thesis of this, which is, that his history is false. And that
what name calling would he use against you?
Oh, man. See, that's kind of difficult to say, because I don't know necessarily what they would have used for name calling back then. I mean, what yeah, I mean, they have to do something with poop, I would imagine, and feces. Because that's what he's playing all the time with shit.
All right, let's go on here.
He immediately wrote a reply to Scioppius entitled Confutatio Fabulae Bordonum. Bordonum as in Bordoni, as in the last name of Scaliger. It is written for Scaliger with unusual moderation and good taste, but perhaps for that very reason, had not the success which its author wished and even expected. In the opinion of the highest and most competent authority, Mr. Pattison, quote, that's Copley Christie's tutor, Mr. Pattison, quote, as a refutation of Scioppius, it is most complete, end quote. So he refuted everything in there, obviously, right?
Yeah, all 500 lies, and he didn't. He'd probably just use one ad hominem attack for all 500 quote unquote lies.
Indeed, they follow that up with a qualifier. But there are certainly grounds for dissenting, and this is Copley Christie adding a qualifier to what his former tutor had said. But there are certainly grounds for dissenting, though with diffidence from this judgment. Scaliger undoubtedly shows that Scioppius has committed more blunders than he has corrected, that his book literally bristles with pure lies and baseless calumnies. But he does not succeed in deducing a single proof either of his father's descent from the La Scala family, or of any single even narrated by Julius as happening to himself. I think that meant signal. I think as in, that might have been autocorrect from my, a signal as in a signal proof of his military service, even narrated by Julius as happening to himself or any member of his family prior to his arrival at Agen. Nor does he even attempt a refutation of what seems really to be the crucial point in the whole controversy, and which Scioppius had proved, as far as the negative can be proved. Namely, that William, the last prince of Verona, had no son Nicholas, the alleged grandfather of Julius, nor indeed any son who could have been such grandfather. But whether complete or not, the Confutatio had no success. The attack of the Jesuits was successful, far more so than they could possibly have hoped. Scioppius was wont to boast that his book had killed Scaliger. I have not come across the source for that citation that Scioppius boasted that. I'd like to actually read him actually saying that. But okay, you're going to say that he boasted about that. You better back that up when you say that, dude. It's kind of a harsh thing to say about him. It certainly embittered the few remaining months of his life, and it is not improbable that the mortification which he suffered may have shortened his days. The Confutatio was his last work. 5 months after it appeared, quote, on the 21st of January, 1609, at 4 a.m, he fell asleep in Heinsius's arms. That's his former student and the head librarian of the University of Leiden. The aspiring spirit ascended before the infinite. The most richly sorted intellect, which had ever spent itself in acquiring knowledge, was in the presence of the omniscient. Mark Pattison.
Wow.
So now there's a little bit about the sources that they use at the very at the bottom of the article. Of Joseph Scaliger, the only biography in any way adequate is that of Jacob Bernays. It was reviewed by Mark Pattison, his student. In the quarterly review in 1860, Mr. Pattison had made many manuscript collections for a life of Joseph Scaliger on a much more extensive scale, which is greatly to be regretted he left unfinished and in too fragmentary a state to be published. The present writer has had access to and made much use of these manuscripts. So now we verify that Richard Copley Christie wasn't just, the young student who was tutored by Mark Pattison. They had a working relationship that went long ways up, probably until his death. So a complete list of the works of Joseph will be found in his life by Bernays. So here they're directing everybody. I skipped over. I removed some of the stuff there because I was afraid about time, but he quotes some books and documents.
No, we're only at 2 hours, 8 minutes. No worries.
So I cut it out, but basically he just defames a whole bunch of books that were written by the French and by some other people and says you shouldn't read them, you should read Bernays.
Oh, dude. Always with their slapstick, man. You can't make this stuff up.
Because all biographies are written by or based off of Scioppius's book on Joseph Scaliger, which I'm finding that people had other sources and were actually better scholars than that. Anyway, the Everyman Encyclopedia. This is the 7th book, right here. There
you go. They can actually see it exists.
So this is the Everyman Encyclopedia, Volume 11. This is printed in London by, I'm going to actually say the publisher for this one. This is published by J.M. Dent & Sons Limited, and in New York by E.P. Dutton and Company. And this was published in 1913 through 14, after the Encyclopedia Britannica 11th edition was published, which still carried Richard Copley Christie's biography, which was influenced by his teacher Mark Pattison and his teacher Jacob Bernays, and then carried on by Edwin Sandys, the British Academy. So J.M. Dent and Sons are examined in Scaliger Part 3, and I actually forgot to mention a key point about it, so we'll talk about it here. Sir Israel Glantz, a key founder of the British Academy and the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, was the editor of the Temple Shakespeare. And even the first, and I believe he even invented the first dust cover jacket. These editions were compiled and published in such a manner as to reach the interested reader of all classics. Now, the Temple Shakespeare, the Temple Shakespeare, J.M. Dent and Sons are the publishers of that, just as the Temple Classics. So I mean, it's like it just comes right back around. So all the classics are controlled by Glantz, creator of the British Academy, who are carrying on the torch of Scaliger's biography in the 11th edition of the Britannica. So let us first examine the brevity and contradiction of Julius's biography in this modern biography. This false history is written as though affirmed, in spite of it being refuted in the dictionaries and encyclopedias next to Scaliger's contemporaries and historical records. Now, this book, this series is made for the common man. You know, the people who don't have the money and the funds to invest in the big leather-bound editions. This is to get people interested in and to study. So it's to, for kids and stuff like that to look at and take to school and write the reports about. Julius Scaliger, Julius Caesar, and I believe I'm reading the whole biography here. A scholar born at the castle of La Rocca on the Lago de Garda, spent his youth in the service of the Emperor Maximilian. In 1514, he entered the University of Bologna and studied classics and medicine. In 1525, he went as a physician to Agen and spent the rest of his life there. His works were largely controversial and deal with classical, philosophical, and scientific subjects. That's it. That's all you get for him. So, the people who don't have a lot of money, just a common average Joe, middle class, lower income people who run the libraries and stuff like that. That's what they're given about Julius Caesar. And this is after 100 years of people writing about the fact that his family is, that's all bullshit. Even in the 9th edition Britannica, which obviously they must not have read or sourced when they made this book. As I note earlier in this presentation, over 100 years before this encyclopedia, the account of Scaliger's birth was clearly refuted in David Irving's book, let alone Thomas Birch's original article from 1734 to 1741. Now let's read Joseph's. Scaliger, Joseph Justus, 1540 to 1609, a classical scholar born at Agen, the son of Julius Caesar Scaliger, educated at Bordeaux by his father and at Paris. In 1563, he was recommended by Jean Dorat as traveling companion to Louis de Chastinier, Lord of La Roche-Posay. The two formed a lasting friendship and visited many European countries together. Scaliger was a professor at Geneva for some years, and in 1593 succeeded Lipsius at the University of Leiden. His numerous works include, and I just eliminated them because there's like 5 books that they said out of his like 30. We've already heard of them, but their source, See Life by Jacob Bernays, Berlin, 1855. So there they are. Here's this really watered down account of his life. If you want to learn more, go see Jacob Bernays' book. All right, so now we're kind of closing this up here. I was doing some research on Jacob Bernays and came across Anthony Grafton and some of his writings. And Anthony Grafton was covered in part 3. He's the foremost Scaliger scholar that is living at this time. He's written numerous books on Scaliger scholarship. I'm really looking forward to acquiring his books and learning more about him and seeing what he has to say. Because some of the stuff he has is actually pretty interesting. But he is a fellow of the British Academy. And so there's always a little bit of something in the background there. But I can throw the book out with our baby off the bathwater, though. He might have something good to say. So Michael Bernays eventually succumbed to the mounting political and cultural pressures that Jacob always resisted. He returned to the ancestral city of Mainz, where he announced his conversion to Christianity. He devoted himself to the philological and historical study of German literature. And there's a little bit of a gap here that I'm going to cut out because it doesn't really relate, but it says Jacob Bernays felt Michael's conversion as a personal wound because they're Jewish. He mourned his brother as dead and never spoke of him again, even to their mutual friends, like the poet and romance scholar Paul Heiss. So in spite of this damaged relationship, though, Jacob left Michael his books upon his passing, from which Michael produced his own historical essays on topics such as, quote, a rich analysis of the funniest footnotes ever written. Those in Gibbon's Decline and Fall are clearly began from the discussions he and his older brother, who also loved Gibbon's more audacious mock-learned remarks. Gibbon's Rise and Fall of Rome, the Freemason, mock-learned remarks, the footnotes of Gibbon. Very interesting. I need to start learning more about that. So going back to Anthony Grafton. True, Bernays did not weigh so heavily on the less gifted of his students as did his English friend, Mark Pattison, the biographer of Isaac Casaubon, who reviewed Bernays' book, and Casaubon is mentioned as a friend of Scaliger's, who reviewed Bernays' book on Scaliger in the Quarterly Review. There's no conflict of interest there, publishing a review of your friend's book, and then set out to produce his own never-finished biography. Pattison told a student who, he thought, might edit John Selden's Table Talk, that he would have to spend at least 20 years memorizing the text and reading the entire literature of the period. The student duly recalled that, quote, he put the thing before me in so unattractive a way that I never did it or anything else worth doing. I consider the ruin of my misspent life very largely due to that conversation, end quote. Wow. But Bernays, he just totally brushed the student off from ever studying it by saying you need to spend 20 years memorizing it before I can ever say anything about it. I don't know much about John Selden's Table Talk, but it seems a little absurd, especially considering we're talking about somebody who's the biographer of Casaubon and is loving and studying Scaliger and spreading lies. But Bernays showed impatience enough towards those unwilling to follow his precepts and example. For example, he drove the young Herman Cohen, who had no sympathies for his teacher's rigorous historicism, out of his seminar in Breslau. What, then, did Jacob Bernays find in Joseph Scaliger? Why did this man of stiff-necked independence devote himself, in the biography and in a large number of his writings, to finding heroes to emulate? And does his work on the history of scholarship perhaps reveal some of the tensions common to this tense, aggressive field? Bernays' motives were both emotional and intellectual. On the first count, I must have had a misspelled type there. On the first count, having a reader have realized ever since Bernays' biography appeared that it had something of the character of an allegory. In laying out the main lines of Scaliger's work and the forces that had shaped his character, Bernays described not only his protagonist, but himself as well. He accepted as credible Scaliger's remarkable statements about the rapidity and independence with which he absorbed information, such as Scaliger's boast that he had read Homer in 3 weeks and made his own grammar of Homeric Greek while doing so. That's incredibly remarkable. While this may seem highly credulous, it is understandable in the light of Bernays' own rapid, self-motivating progress as a scholar. But there's no it's apples to oranges here. The young man who is already at the outset of his 20s reading Joseph Scaliger's Latin letters and studying his annotated books, borrowed by the happy custom of the time from the Leiden University Library, felt a kinship with the other prodigy. More important are the other similarities that emerge on comparison. The two men's refusal to marry, their exile to learned institutions in provincial cities far from their native lands, and above all, their sense of their own nobility. It's Anthony Grafton, fellow of the British Academy, and his book, The Jewish Past Revisited, Reflections on Modern Jewish Historians. Now I'm going to read another quote by Anthony Grafton to close this up. The Scaliger we have now come to know does not much resemble the bearded, venerable figure of Mursius's Athenae Bataviae, or the single-minded seeker after truth unforgettably described Bernays and Pattison. He wanted fame and honor more than truth. He was a good listener and reader rather than a sovereign inventor of new methods. He chose and abandoned subjects and approaches for trifling and personal reasons. Through the first part of his career, Scaliger could not escape from the dilemma to which his character and situation confined him. He loved to find masters in the classroom and in books. He found it easy to learn how to use the new tools they offered. Sometimes he acknowledged that he had employed equipment forged by others, but he could not admit the full extent of his dependence. A nobleman could not owe so much of his eminence to others. He could not bear to be corrected or disowned by those whom he had chosen to follow, and from whom he had decided to borrow. Hence the curious, jagged trajectory of Scaliger's intellectual life as he appropriated method after method, used them in novel combinations, and then found himself driven to reject the great men who betrayed him, claimed their property when they saw it in his work, or criticized his applications of it as illegitimate. Scaliger, the best of students, was the worst of disciples. He thrust his former masters away as forcefully as he had once clasped them to him. That's Anthony Grafton, Fellow of the British Academy, and Joseph Scaliger, Textual Criticism and Exegesis.
Oh, wow. That's quite an amazing... I mean, what you just did is you just overturned a couple of academic fields, and proved, I don't know, just a random number, 10,000 academics as entirely incompetent or complicit. It's like when I published that Wasson article exposing the entire field of ethnomycology and ethnobotany as a fraudulent bunch of incompetent morons, And, we're seeing the same thing, and again, we're seeing how the premise laid out in Spies in Academic Clothing plays out, and it's not even a new idea. It's not something that Robert Heinlein or these guys, put together in modern times. It goes back... half a millennia at least. What's that?
It goes back to the invention of the printing press. I would imagine if you think about opportunist psychopaths, you see a powerful tool, just like the psychopaths see the television and everything else. The printing press would be a very powerful thing.
Well, what did Gordon Wasson, in his famous quote? Let me pull that up here. Sorry, but Gordon Wasson states, where the hell did I put it? Of course, my browser wants to freeze.
Well, I still have an idea in my head, so let me just get this off real quick. So we were seeing the invention of the printing press, and we're talking about influence. If you're a king and nobility, and you want to cement your own historical lineage and cement your kingdom as being further back in the past than may have existed, you have the printing press right there to then begin to propagate books that go out to all the schools. First you start with the nobility, you educate them and their children. They write all the material. They start to spread it down the river, and then there you go.
All right. Well, let's solidify this and bring it full circle and close it, because so in 2012 I published this article, Gordon Wasson, the man, the legend, the myth. Of course, we're gonna bring it right tight here, because Gordon Wasson was a close friend of none other than the fraud Edward Bernays. Okay. And, of course, Gordon Wasson is the so-called discoverer of magic mushrooms, and he was the head of MKUltra Subproject 58, working for the Public Relations Department of J.P. Morgan Bank. So let's bring this on over here. So, and this, Wasson is replying to this guy Bertram Wolfe, and this is October 8, 1970. Bertram Wolfe writes him, he's talking about the sacred mushroom article that Wasson had written in the New York Times. Wasson was crying crocodile tears over how he ruined Maria Sabina, and he's talking about the hippies, peddlers, and dogberries will end, for nature abhors a vacuum. You may have hastened a little by publishing in Life rather than a magazine of anthropologists, but the process was inevitable. And then Wasson replies, October 13, 1970, 5 days later, Dear Mr. Wolfe, do you remember your last letter to me? I was asking you where Tolstoy had said that the printing press was a mighty engine for disseminating ignorance. This Mazatec affair is a case in point. And just to verify here that I'm just going to show Wasson of Bernays. Wasson was close friends with Bernays here. And hold on. We have Bernays actually writing, and my browser is overrun here. We also have Bernays writing a propaganda piece to blow smoke up everyone's ass about how wonderful Wasson is. So we can see now a whole trajectory going back 400 or 500 years. These sons of bitches have been doing this crap, and here's Wasson and Bernays and the CIA and MK Ultra and everything right involved. Wrap it up, tie it with a bow, give them an FU, There you go, man.
Man, yeah, this is a tradition that goes back to these spy networks. Yeah, I'm excited to really dive in and start with the next part, because we're going to get very specific. We're going to go into his works and his relationships and the people he's connected to and why they're important and how they kind of influence the way that the historical narrative that we're seeing now, as far as society is controlled, kind of sits off to. So,
and when can we expect part 5? We do need to wrap it up because we're at about 2.5 hours.
It's going to take some time. I've rewritten outlines so many times and come back to different ideas because there's so much knowledge. I'm going to have to be able to sit down and really put down a very general.
All right, week after next.
I'll try, but there's
I'm giving you a hard time. I think Clinton Bill may be coming back next week. I need to confirm that.
All right.
And anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for participating. Please donate and support the show. Can't do without you. Please support and send donations, contributions to Jacob as well, so he can buy these expensive antiquities books, etc., to track all of this stuff down. Good night. See you next week.
Can I send my email?
What's that?
Can I send my email really quick, just so people know where to go?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
I don't have a website set up yet. If anyone wants to help me.
Just give your email.
Jacob Duellman, JACOB DUELLMAN @gmail.com. That email is linked up with PayPal, but if you'd rather just get in touch with me first before doing that, feel free to send me an email. I'm a very busy man, so it's really difficult for me to stay in contact and talk with people, but I do appreciate all the great messages that everyone sends, and I will try to reply to everyone in time. So please be patient.
And likewise, and I'm backed up, like way backed up on some emails. Please support, donate the show, gnosticmedia.com, triviumeducation.com, etc. Jacob, talk to you soon. Everybody, good night. Sweet dreams. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Up, and I'm about to hit the wrong button.